At 7:42 on a Thursday evening, my husband raised a crystal champagne glass and announced that his mistress would become CEO of the company I had spent 30 years building. There were 600 people in the ballroom when he did it: investors, designers, factory managers, reporters from 3 business magazines, employees who had worked beside me when Vale and Mercer Interiors was nothing more than 2 rented rooms above a hardware store. The stage behind Richard was covered in emerald silk and gold lettering. 30 years of Vale and Mercer, the company logo glowed on the wall above him, the same logo I had drawn on the back of a grocery receipt, while Richard and I sat in a 24-hour diner, too broke to order anything except coffee. I stood near the front table, wearing the green silk dress Richard had chosen for me. "You look distinguished," he had said before we left the house. Distinguished. At 58, I had learned that men often used that word when they no longer wanted to call a woman beautiful. Richard smiled beneath the lights. He had always belonged on a stage. At 62, his hair was silver at the temples, his tuxedo perfectly fitted, his voice warm enough to make strangers believe they had known him for years. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not only where Vale and Mercer has been, but where it is going." Applause rippled through the ballroom. I joined in because I believed I knew what came next. For the previous 6 months, Richard and I had discussed reducing his day-to-day responsibilities. He was tired of travel, he said, tired of quarterly reports, tired of waking at 4 in the morning to call suppliers in Europe. We had not agreed on every detail, but we had agreed the transition would be gradual. Maya Chen, our chief financial officer, would take on more operational authority. I would remain executive vice chair and oversee long-term strategy. Richard would stay as chairman while spending more time at our house on Lake Geneva. At least, that was the plan Richard had repeated to me across our breakfast table. Then he extended one hand toward the side of the stage. And I can think of no one better prepared to lead us into that future than a woman whose vision, energy, and bold thinking have already transformed our brand. My hands stopped moving. The applause continued around me, but the changed. It became distant and hollow, as if the ballroom had suddenly filled with water. Vanessa Cole stepped into the light. She wore emerald green, not simply green. The exact deep shade I had worn at the opening of our first showroom 27 years earlier. Her dark hair fell over one shoulder. Diamonds flashed at her ears. She smiled with practiced humility as Richard held out his hand to her. Vanessa was 36, director of brand development, and had been with the company for 4 years. She was talented. I had never denied that. She was also sleeping with my husband. I had not known for certain until that moment. Suspicion is a quiet thing. It enters through details too small to accuse anyone with. A second phone placed face down on a desk. A business trip extended by one night. A new cologne. A woman who began calling my husband Richard in meetings when everyone else called him Mr. Vale. I had collected those details without allowing myself to arrange them into a picture. Then Richard placed his hand against the small of Vanessa's back. Not for long, less than 2 seconds. But a wife knows the difference between a professional gesture and a familiar touch. The picture completed itself. Subject to formal board confirmation, Richard continued. Vanessa Cole will become the next chief executive officer of Vale and Mercer. The ballroom erupted. Some people rose from their chairs. Others turned toward me. They were trying not to stare, which only made their staring more obvious. Vanessa stepped behind the podium. "I am deeply honored," she said. "This company has an extraordinary history, and I promise to protect that legacy while building something modern, fearless, and new." Legacy, that was what I had become in her speech, something old to be protected, displayed, and moved out of the way. Richard returned to the microphone. And none of this would have been possible without Evelyn. Every face turned toward me. My husband smiled as though he were presenting me with an award, instead of erasing me from my own company. My wife has given Vale and Mercer 30 wonderful years. She stood beside me from the beginning. She raised our son while supporting the demands of this business, and she has earned the right to finally slow down and enjoy the life we worked so hard to create. A few guests applauded uncertainly. Someone behind me whispered, "Did she know?" I kept my expression still. Richard had reduced 3 decades of my work to standing beside him and raising our son. I had negotiated our first manufacturing contract when no bank would lend us money. I had rebuilt our supply chain after a warehouse fire nearly destroyed us. I had found the accounting error that saved the company from a hostile investor. I had worked through pneumonia, my mother's funeral, and 17 Christmas Eves. But in Richard's version, I had supported him. Now I deserved to rest. He lifted his glass. To Vanessa, to the future. Hundreds of glasses rose, mine remained on the table. Across the ballroom, Maya Chen did not lift hers either. Our eyes met for one brief second. Maya's expression was controlled, but I saw something beneath it, not surprise. Warning. Ricard looked down at me from the stage. He was waiting. Perhaps he expected tears, perhaps anger. Perhaps he had prepared security in case I made a scene. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm smile, it was not a forgiving one. It was the smile of a woman who had just remembered something her husband had forgotten. 23 years earlier, during the company's first serious financial crisis, Richard had nearly sold control of Vale and Mercer to a private investor. I had stopped him, not with tears, not with threats, with one paragraph in the company charter, a paragraph Richard had not mentioned in more than 2 decades, a paragraph tied to a single share of stock, my share. Richard believed he had announced the next CEO. But he had only announced the woman he wanted. The decision had not yet been made. And when the final vote came, Richard's vote would not be the one that mattered. Mine would. The applause continued for almost a minute. To everyone else, it was a celebration. To me, it sounded like a building beginning to crack. Richard stepped down from the stage with Vanessa beside him. They were immediately surrounded by board members, reporters, and senior managers eager to be seen congratulating the future CEO. I watched who approached first. George Ellison, one of our oldest board members, embraced Richard and kissed Vanessa's cheek. George had known us since the company operated out of those rented rooms. He had eaten canned soup at our kitchen table, when we could not afford staff bonuses. Now he would not look at me. Thomas Avery, representative of the Minority Investment Fund, shook Vanessa's hand. His smile appeared genuine, but the crease between his eyebrows suggested the announcement had surprised him. Judith Palmer, our independent director, remained seated. Maya stood beside her with both hands resting on the back of a chair. Neither woman applauded. My son Ben stood near the ballroom doors. He had gone pale. That hurt more than Richard's speech. Ben knew something. How much, I could not yet tell. A reporter from Modern Design Business hurried toward me with a microphone. Mrs. Mercer, may we get your reaction to tonight's announcement? 3 decades in business had taught me that public humiliation could become permanent if you gave it the right sentence, so I smiled again. Vale and Mercer has always believed in careful transitions, I said. The board will have a great deal to discuss before any appointment becomes official. The reporter blinked. It was not the supportive statement she had expected. Are you saying the decision has not been finalized? I'm saying exactly what my husband said. It is subject to board confirmation. Behind her, I saw Richard turn his head sharply. He had heard me. Good. The reporter opened her mouth to ask another question. But Vanessa appeared at my side. She carried 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to me. Evelyn, she said brightly. I hope you're happy for me. Her voice was loud enough for the reporter to hear. I took the glass, though I had no intention of drinking from it. Tonight is certainly full of surprises. Vanessa laughed softly. That is one way of putting it. Up close, I noticed a ring on her right hand, a rectangular emerald surrounded by small diamonds. I knew that ring. 3 months earlier, I had seen a charge from Bellamy & Co. Jewelers on one of Richard's private credit cards. When I asked him about it, he said he had purchased a retirement gift for an important European client. The ring had cost $18,000. Apparently, the important European client had Vanessa's hands. She leaned closer, still smiling for the cameras. Thank you for making this easy, she whispered. For one dangerous second, I wanted to throw the champagne in her face. It would have felt satisfying. It also would have made me look unstable, jealous, and exactly as obsolete as Richard wanted everyone to believe I was. So I turned my head slightly and spoke without changing my expression. You seem very confident for someone who has not received a single vote. Her smile tightened, only for a moment, then Richard reached us. There you are. He placed an arm around my waist, performing the role of affectionate husband for the cameras. Evelyn, say something to Vanessa. This is a big night for her. I already have. Richard's fingers pressed harder against my side. May I borrow my wife? He asked Vanessa. She gave him a look so intimate, it confirmed everything his hand on her back had already told me. Of course. Richard guided me away from the crowd. We stopped near a service corridor, beside a tall arrangement of white roses. What are you doing? he asked through a smile. I attended the anniversary celebration of the company I founded. You know what I mean. You announced a chief executive officer without a board vote. The vote is a formality, then you should have no reason to be concerned. His jaw hardened. This evening matters. Do not create a spectacle because you're emotional. Emotional, that word had been used against women in boardrooms long before Vanessa learned to spell chief executive officer. You announced your mistress as my replacement in front of 600 people, I said. I think I'm showing remarkable restraint. Richard's eyes flickered toward the ballroom. Keep your voice down, so you admit it. I'm not discussing our marriage here. You chose to discuss it when you put your hand on her back under a spotlight. His face changed. Not guilt, irritation. That told me more than an apology ever could. We will talk at home, he said. Tonight, you will be gracious. He walked back toward the guests without waiting for my answer. For the next hour, I became the gracious wife. I shook hands. I accepted compliments about the anniversary. I listened while people told me how wonderful it must feel to enter retirement. One supplier touched my arm and said, "You must be so proud that Richard found someone young enough to carry the workload." I told him I was still perfectly capable of carrying my own workload. He laughed because he thought I was joking. Near the end of the evening, I escaped to the ladies' room. I stood before the mirror and removed one earring because my fingers needed something to do. My reflection looked composed. That was reassuring. My mother had once told me that dignity was not silence. It was choosing the moment when your voice would have the greatest effect. The door opened behind me. Margaret Lewis, one of our earliest clients and an old family friend, stepped inside. She took one look at my face. "Oh, Evelyn. Please don't. Did you know?" "No." She came closer. "Do you need somewhere to stay tonight?" The question nearly undid me, not because I needed a room, because she already understood that whatever Richard had destroyed on that stage would follow us home. "I'll be all right," I said. "You don't have to be all right immediately." "No. But I do have to think." When I returned to the ballroom, most guests were leaving. George avoided me again. Thomas was on his phone near the doors. Judith gave me a small nod. Ben had disappeared. Maya stood beside my table, speaking to a waiter. When she moved away, I noticed a white envelope beneath my water glass. My name was written across the front in her precise handwriting. I opened it beneath the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 5 words appeared in the center. "Do not sign anything tonight." I read the message twice, then I looked across the ballroom. Maya was standing near the exit. She did not turn around, but she lifted one hand slightly as she walked away. Not a wave, a signal. Richard's betrayal was no longer the only secret in the room. Richard did not speak during the drive home. He sat in the back of the car with his phone in his hand, replying to congratulatory messages. Each time the screen illuminated his face, I saw the satisfied expression of a man who believed the most difficult part of his plan was over. I watched the city pass outside the window. 30 years earlier, Richard and I had driven these same streets in a second-hand station wagon with a broken heater. We delivered furniture ourselves because we could not afford a driver. On winter mornings, I wore 2 pairs of socks and kept invoices beneath my coat so the ink would not freeze. That young couple would not have recognized the 2 people sitting in the black car. Or perhaps I was the only one who had changed. When we reached the house, Richard went directly to the study. I removed my shoes in the entrance hall and stood beneath the chandelier we had purchased after our first profitable year. Richard had insisted on it. "We should buy one thing that proves we made it," he had said. I wondered what object would prove we had lost everything that mattered. I went upstairs and removed my dress. By the time I changed into a robe, Richard was in the bedroom with a leather folder beneath his arm. He placed it on the bench at the foot of our bed. "We should handle this calmly," he said. "Is that what you told Vanessa?" His expression tightened. "I'm not interested in exchanging insults." "No, you're interested in exchanging wives. I did not come here to fight. You announced your mistress as CEO in front of our employees. Vanessa's qualifications are not connected to our personal relationship. Your personal relationship is connected to every decision you make about her." He opened the folder. Inside were several documents marked with yellow tabs. I had the lawyers prepare a transition package. I did not touch it. "What kind of transition?" "Your retirement from executive responsibilities." "I have not agreed to retire." "You've complained for years that you're tired." "I complained that I was tired." I did not say I was incompetent, he ignored that. The package is generous. You retain your existing financial interest, receive an annual consulting payment, and continue using the title of co-founder. Using the title? It is your title. Then why does your document make it sound as if you're lending it to me? Richard exhaled slowly. Evelyn, please. Do not turn this into a battle you cannot win. I looked at the documents. The first was a retirement notice. The second released me from operational authority. The third contained a 5-year non-competition agreement. The fourth granted Richard my voting proxy for 6 months. There it was. The reason, he had brought the papers upstairs on the same night as his announcement. Richard did not merely want me away from the office. He wanted my vote. Maya's warning echoed in my mind. Do not sign anything tonight. I lifted the proxy document. You need this completed before the board meeting. It will make the transition easier. For whom? For everyone, especially Vanessa. He walked toward the windows. Beyond the glass, the lake was black and still. Vanessa understands where this industry is going, he said. Digital sales, international licensing, younger consumers. She has energy. I had energy when I built the company you are giving her. I am not giving her the company. You are giving her my position. You haven't wanted the position for years. That is not true. You stopped attending industry events because my father was dying. You delegated operations because you asked me to stabilize the factories. You've become cautious. I became cautious because you began approving contracts without reading them. He turned. This is exactly why the company needs a change. The contempt in his voice silenced me more effectively than shouting would have. I studied the man before me, the silver hair, the expensive watch. The confidence created by decades of people laughing at his jokes and calling him visionary. I had protected that confidence. Whenever Richard made a reckless promise, I found a way to deliver it. Whenever he forgot a name, a deadline, or a number, I placed the correct information in his hand before anyone noticed. He had mistaken my protection for dependence. How long? I asked. Richard knew what I meant. He stared toward the lake again. That isn't relevant. How long have you been sleeping with her? Our marriage has been over for years. Interesting. No one informed me. We have been living separate lives. We had dinner together on Tuesday. That is not a marriage. We spent Christmas with Ben. That is not a marriage. You kissed me before you left for London last month. He said nothing. Was she there? Silence answered for him. I placed the proxy document back in the folder. You lied to me. I was trying to avoid hurting you. You announced her promotion in front of 600 people. The announcement had to be made. No. You wanted it made publicly so I would be too humiliated to object. For the first time that night, Richard looked uncertain. Only for a heartbeat. Then he recovered. The board supports me. The board has not voted. It will. What happens if it does not? His mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. Then the board will have to consider whether your continued involvement is damaging the company. There it was, the threat beneath the retirement package. Sign quietly, or he would have me removed publicly. You think they will vote me out? I think they will do what is necessary. And you? I am doing what is necessary. I closed the folder and pushed it toward him. I'm not signing. His face darkened. You have 48 hours before the legal team finalizes the board materials. I don't need 48 hours. You should consider the consequences. So should you. Richard picked up the folder. At the bedroom door, he stopped. You have more money than you could ever spend, Evelyn. You have houses, investments, and everything you asked for. Why make this ugly? I stared at him because he truly did not understand. He believed the company was only money. He had forgotten the people who had mortgaged homes to help us buy equipment, the women who stitched our earliest samples, the factory managers who worked overnight beside me after the fire, the employees who had trusted us with their pensions and their futures. Valen Mercer was not something he could hand to his mistress as proof of love. You made it ugly, I said. I'm only refusing to close my eyes. He left. I waited until I heard the study door close downstairs. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my bedside table. Beneath old letters and a velvet box containing my mother's pearls was a brass key. I had not used it in years. The safe was hidden behind a landscape painting in my dressing room. Inside were passports, property deeds, insurance documents, and a thin archival folder from the earliest days of Valen Mercer. I turned the key. The safe opened with a soft metallic click. At the back of the middle shelf sat a cream envelope stamped with the company's original seal. I reached toward it, then my phone vibrated. A message from Maya appeared. 6:15 tomorrow morning. Finch Cafe near the old factory. Come alone. I looked at the folder in the safe. Whatever Richard was planning, Maya believed it was larger than an affair. I closed the safe without removing the envelope. At 6:15 the next morning, I intended to learn how much larger. Finch Cafe had 12 tables, none of them matching. It opened at 6 for factory workers and delivery drivers, which meant no one looked twice when I entered wearing dark trousers, a wool coat and sunglasses. The old Vale and Mercer factory stood 3 blocks away. Our company had outgrown it 20 years earlier, but I had never allowed Richard to sell the property. The building had become a training center and storage facility. I told everyone I kept it for practical reasons. The truth was simpler. It reminded me who we had been before success made Richard believe he was untouchable. Maya sat in the rear corner with 2 coffees and a silver laptop. She wore no makeup. Her black hair was tied at the nape of her neck. A canvas bag rested beside her chair. "You came alone?" she asked. "Yes. Did you sign anything?" "No." Relief crossed her face. I sat opposite her. "Tell me what is happening." Maya glanced toward the counter before opening her laptop. For 6 months, Richard and Vanessa have been authorizing payments to an outside consultant called Vantage Strategic Partners. I've seen the name in monthly reports. You've seen a condensed line item. Richard moved the full invoices out of the standard board packet. How much? Just under $1.8 million. I stared at her. For branding advice? That is how it is classified. What did we receive? That is the problem. I can't find a defined scope of work. She turned the laptop toward me. A series of invoices filled the screen: brand repositioning, assessment, market entry strategy, corporate asset optimization. Each description was vague enough to conceal almost anything. Who approved these? I asked. Richard. Vanessa countersigned most of them. Why did your department pay without supporting contracts? I objected. Richard used his chairman's authority and told accounting the contracts were confidential. Confidential from the chief financial officer? He said there were acquisition risks. My stomach tightened. What kind of acquisition? He would not say. Maya opened another file. These are the data requests submitted by Vantage. A spreadsheet listed the information Vanessa's department had gathered. Customer contracts by profitability. Real estate valuations. Supplier termination clauses. Severance obligations. Pension exposure. Cost of closing each manufacturing location. I read the final line twice. Estimated cost of workforce reduction by percentage. Why would a branding consultant need this? They wouldn't. How many people have seen these files? As far as I know, Vanessa, Richard, 2 employees in legal, and someone in information technology. Ben? I don't know. That explained his face at the party. Perhaps my son had known about more than the affair. Maya lowered her voice. I began reviewing server activity 3 weeks ago. Someone with Vanessa's credentials downloaded our entire customer database and uploaded it to an encrypted external portal. When? The night Richard left for London. The same trip during which he had kissed me goodbye. Do you know where the portal leads? Not yet, but yesterday something was printed from Richard's office to the executive floor copier. She reached into the canvas bag and removed 3 sheets of paper. The assistant who found it thought it belonged to me because it contained financial projections. I picked up the first page. At the top appeared a name I recognized immediately. Halcyon Home Group. Vale and Mercer had competed with Halcyon for almost 15 years. They were larger than us, more aggressive and famous for buying family-owned companies before breaking them apart. 2 years earlier, Halcyon had acquired a textile manufacturer in North Carolina. Within 8 months, the factory closed and 400 people lost their jobs. Richard had publicly called the acquisition corporate vandalism. Now their name appeared on a document from his private printer. The title read, Preliminary Integration and Asset Realization. Plenty turned to the second page. It contained projections for selling company property and consolidating manufacturing. The location codes were abbreviated, but I knew them: Plant 1, Plant 3, our distribution center, our design studio. I moved to the final page. Near the bottom was a proposed timeline. Phase 1, Executive Transition. Phase 2, Board Authorization. Phase 3, Transaction Announcement. Beneath those words appeared a date. 30 days after Vanessa's appointment as CEO. I looked up at Maya. They are selling the company. I think they are preparing to. Does the board know? I don't believe so. Thomas would demand financial projections. Judith would never approve closing Plant 1 without a labor impact review. And Richard knows that. So he needs Vanessa in the CEO position before the sale reaches the board. Maya nodded. As CEO, she could authorize broader due diligence, restructure senior management, and control what information reaches the directors. And my voting proxy would give Richard an extra vote while they did it. That is why I told you not to sign. A waitress approached with a pot of coffee. Maya closed the laptop until she moved away. I stared through the cafe window toward the old factory. At that hour, lights were appearing one by one in the building, employees beginning their shifts. People who had no idea their futures might already be listed in a document as closure costs. Why come to me? I asked. Maya's expression changed. For the first time that morning, she looked offended. Because you built the financial controls they are bypassing. Because Richard is using chairman's authority to hide material information from the board. And because if this transaction proceeds the way I think it will, hundreds of people will lose their jobs while Richard and Vanessa walk away wealthy. Do you have proof of their personal benefit? Not yet. Then what we have is suspicious, not conclusive. I know. We need contracts, emails, data transfer records. Anything connecting Vantage to Halcyon. Maya watched me carefully. What are you going to do? The question carried more weight than she intended. 24 hours earlier, I might have said I needed time. I might have gone home, confronted Richard and given him an opportunity to explain. That was the wife I had been. The woman sitting in Finch Cafe was no longer protecting her husband from the consequences of his own choices. First, I said, we find out who owns Vantage Strategic Partners. Maya opened the laptop again, and then we count the board votes. What if Richard already has enough? He doesn't. You sound certain. I am. I thought about the cream envelope inside my safe. About the original company charter, about the single Class A founder's share issued during our first financial crisis. Richard had probably forgotten it existed. Even I had not thought about it in years. But a forgotten right was still a right. And a forgotten vote could still destroy a plan. Maya leaned closer. There is something else. She slid the final page toward me and pointed to a line I had overlooked. Executive Transition Incentive payable upon successful change of control. 2 names appeared beneath it, Richard Vale, Vanessa Cole. No figures were shown, but the meaning was clear. This was not a plan to save Vale and Mercer. It was a plan to sell it, and reward the 2 people betraying it. I folded the pages carefully and placed them inside my coat. Do not confront either of them, I said. I wasn't planning to. Do not change the payment process yet. Do not alert legal. Do not send anything through the company email system. Maya studied me. You think they're monitoring us? I think a man who humiliates his wife in front of 600 people has already convinced himself she cannot fight back. I stood and picked up my coffee. For now, we let him keep believing that. Outside, the morning air was cold enough to hurt my lungs. Across the street, the old factory doors opened and the first employees walked inside. Richard believed he was choosing Vanessa over me. He had not yet understood the truth. He was choosing Vanessa over every person who had helped build our company, and I was about to make him cast that choice in front of the entire board. By 9 o'clock that morning, Vanessa Cole was sitting in my office. Not near it, not waiting outside it, sitting behind my desk. I knew because my assistant, Caroline, called me while I was still parked across from Finch Cafe. Her voice was so quiet that I had to turn up the volume. Mrs. Mercer, I thought you should know that Miss Cole arrived 20 minutes ago with 2 people from facilities. What are they doing? There was a pause. They're moving your things. For a moment, I said nothing. Across the street, workers continued entering the old factory. A man in a blue jacket held the door for 2 women carrying coffee. Somewhere inside, machinery began its low morning hum. The company was waking up, and Vanessa was already rearranging its history. Did she show you an authorization? She said. Mr. Vale approved the transition. Did she show you anything in writing? No, then do not help them remove another item. Caroline exhaled with relief. I already told facilities to wait, but Miss Cole said I could be replaced if I interfered. She does not have the authority to replace you. She said she will by the end of the week. Of course she did. Vanessa had been publicly announced as the future CEO less than 14 hours earlier, and already she was acting as if the title belonged to her. Stay where you are, I said. I'm on my way. The executive floor of Vale and Mercer occupied the top 2 levels of a restored limestone building downtown. Richard had chosen the location because the entrance photographed well. I had chosen it because the lease included warehouse access and enough reinforced flooring to support the design archive. When I stepped from the elevator, the receptionist looked up and immediately looked down again. News traveled quickly in a company. Humiliation traveled faster. Carolyn was standing outside my office with her arms folded. 2 facilities employees waited beside a cart loaded with framed photographs, product samples and boxes. One of the photographs showed Richard and me in front of our first showroom. Another showed the ribbon-cutting ceremony at Plant 1. A third showed a group of employees after the warehouse fire. Their clothes stained with smoke. All of us exhausted and smiling because we had reopened 4 days ahead of schedule. The photographs had hung on my wall for years. Now they were stacked like unwanted furniture. Caroline approached me. "I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for." She told them the office needed to be ready before the board meeting. Did she say when that meeting would be? Next Thursday. 7 days. Richard intended to complete the humiliation before the board had even voted. I looked at the facility's employees. "Please return everything to its original position." One of them, a young man named Louis, shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Cole said, "I know what Senskins said." I kept my voice calm until the board appoints a new chief executive and approves a leadership transition. This remains my office. You will not be disciplined for following the company's existing authority structure. Louis glanced at his colleague. Then both men began unloading the cart. I opened the office door. Vanessa sat behind my desk with a cup of coffee, placed on the coaster my son had made for me when he was 8. She had removed my leather desk pad and replaced it with a white marble organizer. A stack of color samples lay beside her laptop. 2 members of the marketing department stood near the windows, holding presentation boards. On the wall behind Vanessa, the framed sketch of our original logo was gone. In its place was a large presentation board bearing the words, Vale and Mercer 2 Po. The new logo was sharper, thinner, and entirely forgettable. Vanessa looked up as if I were a visitor who had arrived without an appointment. "Evelyn," she did not stand. "You're early." "For my own office?" Her gaze moved toward the open door, where Louise was returning the photographs to the wall. "I gave instructions for those to be moved." "You gave instructions you had no authority to give." The 2 marketing employees became very interested in the floor. Vanessa closed her laptop. "Could you give us a minute?" They gathered their boards and left quickly. When the door closed, Vanessa leaned back in my chair. "I understand this is difficult." "You understand nothing about what is difficult. I know you feel displaced." "I am not displaced." Richard thought it would be easier if we began the transition immediately. "Richard's announcement does not make you CEO, not yet." The confidence in her voice was almost admirable. "Then you should wait until yet becomes now, before occupying another executive's office." Vanessa folded her hands. "This room is adjacent to Richard's. It makes sense for the new CEO. This room is adjacent to the finance department, legal archives and board conference room, because I designed the executive layout." She gave a small smile. "Exactly. Was designed for another era." I walked to the wall and examined the new logo. "Did you design this?" "My team did. It looks like a hotel bathroom product." Her smile disappeared. "You may not like my approach, but the company needs to change. The company changes every day. It does not require your permission. It needs leadership that understands modern consumers. And you believe I do not?" "I believe your strengths are historical." There was the word again. Historical. Legacy. Distinguished. They were burying me with compliments. Vanessa rose from the chair and walked toward the windows. Below us, the city moved through the morning. Cars crossed the bridge. Delivery trucks lined the loading entrance. Vale and Mercer signs were visible on 3 nearby buildings. "When I was hired," she said, "this company had an extraordinary reputation, but it was becoming invisible to people under 40. When you were hired, online sales had increased 18% for 3 consecutive years. Because your team discounted heavily. Because your team spent $12 million on a campaign with no measurable return." Her shoulders stiffened. "You never believed in me. I approved your promotion twice. You kept me below people with less vision. I kept you below people with more experience. Experience is often another word for fear, and ambition is often another word for impatience." Vanessa turned to face me. "Richard believes in me. There was no professional meaning left in that sentence. We both knew it. I looked at the emerald ring on her hand. He believes whatever makes him feel young. Her expression hardened. You think this is about age because that is easier than admitting you have lost influence. I think this is about a man who confused being admired with being loved. And what did he confuse marriage with? The cruelty was deliberate. She wanted me to react. She wanted tears, anger, or a raised voice she could describe later as instability. I walked toward the desk instead. My desk. Near the edge sat a slim gray folder bearing the Halcyon Home Group logo. Vanessa noticed my eyes move toward it. She crossed the room quickly and closed the folder. Confidential brand research. From a competitor? Industry benchmarking. Does industry benchmarking usually include workforce reduction figures? For the first time, she appeared genuinely startled. It lasted less than a second. But I saw it, Maya had been right. Vanessa did not know how much I knew. What are you talking about? She asked. I am asking a simple question. I have no idea. She placed the gray folder inside the top desk drawer and pushed it closed. The drawer did not lock properly. It remained open by less than an inch, enough for me to see the edge of a spreadsheet. 2 column headings were visible: retained locations, closed locations. Under the second column, I saw the code for Plant 1, my first factory. The place where Richard and I had worked weekends painting walls, because we could not afford contractors. The place that now employed more than 200 people. Vanessa followed my gaze and pushed the drawer shut. You should not be reading confidential material. In my desk? This will be my desk soon. I moved closer until only the width of the desk separated us. You are very certain. The votes are already arranged, are they? Richard would not have made the announcement otherwise. I almost laughed. Richard had made hundreds of announcements before arranging the details. That was why he had needed me for 30 years. But Vanessa did not understand the difference between his confidence and his competence. She had mistaken the performance for the man. I have spent my entire career watching people underestimate what is required to keep this company alive, I said. You are not the first, and you are not the future. Perhaps not, but I am still the present. I picked up the marble organizer and moved it to a side table. Then I returned my leather desk pad to its original position. Vanessa watched me without speaking. You should collect your things, I said. I am meeting Richard here in 10 minutes. Then you can meet him in his office. You are making this unnecessarily hostile. No. Hostile would have been announcing myself as CEO of your department at your birthday party. Her cheeks colored. I opened the door. Carolyn stood outside, pretending to examine a calendar. Carolyn, please ask facilities to remove Ms. Cole's personal items and return them to her office. Vanessa remained beside my desk. This will not end well for you. That depends on where you think the story ends. She picked up her handbag and laptop. As she passed me, she lowered her voice. People respect history, Evelyn, but they do not want history running the future. I glanced toward my chair. You should be careful with that chair, I said. It belongs to someone who has not resigned. Vanessa left without answering. I waited until the elevator doors closed behind her. Then I entered my office and shut the door. The gray Halcyon folder was gone. But a shallow scratch remained on the inside of the desk drawer, where Vanessa had pulled it open too quickly. I sat down and looked at the restored photographs on the wall, at the people from Plant 1. At the faces of men and women who believed Vale and Mercer would still exist next year. Richard and Vanessa were not preparing a leadership transition. They were preparing a liquidation disguised as progress. And if they believed moving my photographs would remove me from the company, they had never understood what those photographs represented. They were not decorations. They were witnesses. Hannengraller. At 11:30 that morning, Richard summoned me to his office. His assistant did not call it a meeting. She said, Mr. Vale would like a word. For 30 years I had watched language change around power. When Richard wanted something, it was a request. When I wanted clarification, it was resistance. When Richard raised his voice, he was passionate. When I refused to smile, I was difficult. I entered without waiting for permission. Richard stood beside the windows, one hand in his pocket. Vanessa sat on the sofa, legs crossed, her handbag beside her. Apparently she had not returned to her own office after all. Richard gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. What happened this morning? I came to work. You embarrassed Vanessa in front of her staff. She occupied my office without authorization. She is preparing for her new role. She does not have a new role. Vanessa shifted on the sofa. I told Richard you seemed upset. Thank you for the diagnosis. Richard walked behind his desk. This behavior needs to stop. What behavior? Undermining the transition. There is no transition until the board votes. His expression changed slightly. He had expected me to focus on the affair. He had expected accusations, tears and questions about how long they had been together. Instead, I was speaking about governance. That made him uncomfortable. The board meeting will be next Thursday, he said. Vanessa's appointment will be confirmed then. And the agenda? Leadership succession. Nothing else? He hesitated. Organizational modernization, does that include selling the company? Vanessa's eyes moved toward Richard. He answered too quickly. No. Closing Plant 1? No. Hiring Vantage strategic partners for nearly $2 million? Silence. Richard's gaze hardened. Where did you hear that? I reviewed the company's financial activity. You no longer supervise day-to-day accounting. I remain executive vice chair and a director. Maya should not be discussing confidential transactions with you. I had not mentioned Maya, Richard had. I kept my face still. Why would you assume she did? His jaw tightened. You have always had allies in finance. Allies are unnecessary when records exist. Vanessa stood. This conversation is becoming inappropriate. You are not a director, I said. Whether this conversation is appropriate is not your decision. Richard raised his voice. Enough. The single word struck the room like a slap. He lowered his tone immediately, perhaps remembering that his assistant sat beyond the glass door. Evelyn, I am trying to protect you from a humiliating public fight. You began the public fight. You will lose the board vote. Then there should be no need to pressure me into signing a proxy. Vanessa glanced at the folder on Richard's desk. He noticed. So did I. They support the appointment, he said. Who? The directors. Name them. I am not discussing private conversations. Then you do not have commitments. I have enough. That was not the same answer. Richard had spent decades closing sales. When he possessed a signed agreement, he said he had an agreement. When he was still persuading someone, he said the outcome was inevitable. I knew the difference. So you have your vote, I said. Perhaps George. George understands the company needs strong leadership. Thomas? He understands financial value. Judith? Richard did not answer. And Maya? Her job is to present financial information, not decide strategy. She is a director. Her job is to vote. Vanessa looked from Richard to me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of concern. Perhaps she had believed the board was already united. Perhaps Richard had told her the same story he told everyone else. That his certainty was proof. I turned toward the door. Where are you going? Richard asked. Back to the office you attempted to give away. You need to sign the transition papers. No. You are forcing me to take formal action. Then take it. His voice dropped. Do not test me. I looked at the man I had once trusted with every part of my life. You are the one who scheduled a vote before counting the people entitled to cast it. Then I left. Maya was waiting in my office at noon with Judith Palmer. Judith was 65. A former labor attorney with a severe gray bob and the unnerving habit of allowing silence to continue until other people filled it with mistakes. She closed the door behind her. I assume Richard does not know I am here, she said. He suspects Maya and I are speaking. Then we will not stay long. Maya placed a sheet of paper on my desk. It contained 6 names. The board of Vale and Mercer had once included 9 members. Over the years, retirements and restructuring had reduced it to 6 voting directors: Richard Vale, Evelyn Mercer, Maya Chen, George Ellison, Judith Palmer, Thomas Avery. Richard believes George and Thomas are with him, I said. George is, Judith replied. He called me yesterday and said resistance would only damage the company. What did you say? That directors who decide before reviewing materials damage companies. A faint smile touched Maya's mouth. And Thomas? I asked. Judith shook her head. He likes transactions. Halcyon could offer a substantial premium. He has not been told about Halcyon, he may suspect. Maya pointed to the list. If Richard has himself, George and Thomas, that gives him 3. And we have us, Judith said. She looked at me. Do we? Yes. And what exactly are we voting against? Vanessa's appointment. Only that. I understood her question. Breaking Vanessa would not necessarily stop the sale. Richard could nominate someone else, restructure the deal, or call another meeting. We are voting against an appointment made under an undisclosed conflict of interest, I said. But before the meeting, we need evidence that the conflict extends to the Halcyon transaction. Judith studied me. You have proof of a transaction? Preliminary documents, signed? Not yet. Then be careful. Suspicion is not evidence. I know, she tapped Thomas's name. If the proposed sale generates enough money, he may support it even if Richard concealed the early negotiations. Would he support closing 2 factories? He will call it restructuring. Would he support a transaction that personally rewards Richard and Vanessa? That depends on whether the board was informed. They were not. Prove it. Maya opened her laptop. We are tracing Vantage Strategic Partners. Judith stood. I need distance until you have something concrete. If Richard realizes the 3 of us have coordinated, he will accuse us of forming a faction. We are a faction, Maya said. Judith looked at her. We are directors fulfilling fiduciary obligations. Use the language that survives in court. After she left, Maya circled 3 names, Richard, Thomas, then she penciled Avers, Evelyn, Maya, Judith. 3 to 3, she said. If Judith holds, she will. If Thomas does not change, he might. And if Richard attempts to remove me before the appointment vote, Maya looked up. Can he? Not alone. But he placed my position on the agenda. My office phone rang. Carolyn's voice came through the speaker. Mr. Reed is calling for you. Put him through. Samuel Reed had been the company's outside counsel during its first 20 years. He had retired from active practice but remained the trustee of several founder documents. His voice sounded older than the last time we had spoken, but no less precise. Evelyn, I received your message. Do you still have the original charter? I have an archived copy. The executed version may be in off-site storage. I need the shareholder provisions from the 2003 recapitalization. There was a pause. That is a very specific request. It has become a very specific week. Samuel did not ask about Richard or Vanessa. He had represented companies long enough to know that people rarely searched old governing documents because their marriages were healthy. I will check the storage index, he said. But the electronic version should be sufficient for most purposes. The current electronic version does not include the founder share schedule. Another pause. You remember that? I wrote it. Yes, he said quietly. You did. When can you confirm whether it is still in force? Give me a day. I may not have one. Has Richard called a vote? Next Thursday. Then you have 7 days, if he keeps the schedule. Samuel was silent for several seconds. Do not rely on Richard keeping a schedule when changing it benefits him. I wasn't planning to. I'll find the original. After we ended the call, Maya leaned back. What happens if the vote is tied? Normally the chairman breaks it. Richard. Yes, but you sounded as if that might not apply. I looked at the 6 names again, 3 on one side, 3 on the other. More than 20 years earlier, I had insisted on one protection because Richard had nearly surrendered control of the company during a cash crisis. He had called the provision unnecessary. The investor had called it insulting. Samuel had called it unusual but enforceable. I had called it insurance. If the original charter says what I remember, I said, Richard does not break that tie. Who does? My phone lit up with a new email. The subject line read, An order of special board meeting. Richard had moved the meeting. It would no longer take place the following Thursday. It was scheduled for Monday morning, 4 days away. Attached to the notice was the agenda. 1. Appointment of Chief Executive Officer. Point 2. Authorization of Strategic Restructuring. 3. Review of Evelyn Mercer's continued board service. Richard was trying to remove me, appoint Vanessa, and authorize the first stage of the transaction in a single meeting. Maya read the agenda over my shoulder. He is accelerating. No, I said. He is afraid. Another message appeared, this one from Samuel, the storage reference. I am retrieving the file personally as I placed the phone face down. Richard thinks this is a race to Monday. Maya said. It is not. What is it? Account. I picked up the page containing the directors' names, vote documents, payments, promises. I drew a line through the center of the paper. By Monday, we need to know exactly what Richard has already given away, and exactly which 3 people still believe him. Vantage Strategic Partners was registered in Delaware. That told us almost nothing. Its listed business address belonged to a corporate filing service used by hundreds of companies. Its public website contained 4 pages of polished language about transformational value and strategic alignment, but no employee names, client history, or completed projects. The photograph on its homepage showed a glass office tower in Singapore. A reverse image search revealed the same photograph on the website of a commercial real estate firm in Toronto. The phone number led to an answering service. The company had been created 8 months earlier, 2 months before its first invoice to Vale and Mercer. Maya and I worked from my home library on Saturday because neither of us trusted the company network. Rain struck the windows throughout the morning. Richard had not come home Friday night. His assistant told mine he was attending an executive strategy retreat. Vanessa's social media account showed a photograph of a fireplace, 2 glasses of wine and no location tag. I did not ask where they were. The answer no longer mattered personally, professionally it mattered a great deal. Vantage has no visible operating staff, Maya said. But payments are routed through a bank in New York. Can you trace the beneficial owner? Not through normal finance access. Ben may be able to request due diligence records from legal. I had texted my son twice since the anniversary party. He had not replied. Do not involve him yet, I said. Maya looked at me over the top of her laptop. You think he is helping Richard? I think he knows more than he wants me to know. Would he hide a sale from you? He hid the affair. You do not know that. I saw his face at the party. Maya returned her attention to the screen. Knowing and proving are different. Judith's words, the language that survives in court. At 10:15, Maya found the first connection. Vantage's registered manager was another corporation called Alderbridge Holdings. Alderbridge's annual filing named a single director, Nathan Cole. Cole, I said. Maya searched the name. Nathan Cole was Vanessa's older brother. His professional profile described him as an independent mergers and acquisitions advisor. 3 years earlier, he had worked for Halcyon Home Group. Maya turned the laptop toward me. A photograph showed Nathan standing beside Halcyon's chief development officer at a trade conference. Vanessa did not disclose a related party interest, she said. Did Richard? Not in any document I received. So the company paid nearly $2 million to his mistress's brother for transaction preparation, through 2 shell entities. And Halcyon received our internal data. We still need proof that Vantage transmitted it. Can information technology recover portal logs? They can. But the head of IT reports directly to Richard. Who beneath him has access? Maya thought for a moment. Daniel Ruiz, director of cybersecurity. Does Richard know him? Probably not well. Daniel joined after the ransomware incident. I worked with him during that review. Maya gave me a questioning look. Personally? For 3 nights, Richard was in Milan. I called Daniel from my private phone. He answered on the 4th ring. Mrs. Mercer? I need to ask you something and I need a truthful answer. There was a pause. All right. Has information from Vale and Mercer been uploaded to an external due diligence portal under Vanessa Cole's credentials? Another pause, longer this time. I cannot discuss security activity outside official reporting channels. Did you report it? I submitted an alert. To whom? My supervisor. And the alert was closed as authorized executive activity. Authorized by whom? I was not told. Daniel, material company data may have been transferred to a competitor without board authorization. I understand. Do the logs still exist? Yes. Preserve them. I already did. That answer changed everything. Why? His voice lowered. Because I have never seen a brand development officer download employee severance models. I closed my eyes briefly. How much time do we have before the logs are overwritten? 90 days under standard retention. Longer if placed under legal hold. Do not place the hold yet. It may alert them. I know. Can you identify the destination? The portal belongs to a transaction services provider. The client name is hidden from normal access. Could it belong to Halcyon? It could. Can you prove it? Not without authority. Preserve everything. I will obtain the authority. After the call, Maya stared at me. You have people everywhere. No. I have 30 years of answering my phone when people needed help. At noon, Judith arrived carrying a paper bag of sandwiches. She listened while Maya explained the Vantage connection, related party payments, Judith said. Undisclosed conflict. Possible transfer of confidential information. Is it enough? I asked. To stop a vote temporarily, perhaps. To remove Richard? Not yet. What do we need? A signed agreement, proof of personal compensation or evidence he exceeded his authority. Maya opened the preliminary Halcyon document. The timeline implies a deal. An implication is not a commitment. What about the change of control incentive? No amounts. No signatures. Judith unwrapped a sandwich but did not eat it. If Richard has already promised Halcyon something, there will be a memorandum, exclusivity agreement or letter of intent. Where? Legal. All 3 of us thought of Ben. At 1:30 my phone rang. My son's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. Ben, Mom, he sounded exhausted. Where are you? At home? Alone? Yes, what is happening? He did not answer. Did you know about Vanessa? I knew Dad was seeing someone. How long? A few months. A few months before you told me, or a few months before party? Mom, answer. Before the party. The pain was sharp but brief. There would be time for it later. Did you know he was naming her CEO? I heard it might happen. Did you know he intends to sell the company to Halcyon? Silence. That silence was not ignorance. Ben. Dad said it was exploratory. Did you review documents? I was asked to prepare change of control summaries. For the board? For Richard. Did he tell you the board had authorized negotiations? He said he had authority as chairman. He does not. I know that now. Ben breathed out slowly. Yes, the library seemed to become very still. Signed by whom? Dad, on behalf of Vale and Mercer? Yes, where is it? In the restricted legal drive. Can you send it to me? No. Will you? I said I can't, because it violates policy, or because you are protecting him. Because if I transmit it without authorization, I could lose my license. Judith held out her hand. I passed her the phone. Ben, this is Judith Palmer. I am an independent director of Vale and Mercer. I am instructing you to preserve all documents related to Halcyon Home Group, Vantage Strategic Partners, and any proposed change of control transaction. You cannot direct legal staff individually. I am not asking you to produce them yet. I am instructing preservation based on credible evidence of a material governance violation. Ben was silent. Judith continued. If anyone asks you to delete, revise or relocate those documents, you will notify me immediately. Do you understand? Yes. Has anyone asked you to do so? Another pause. Not yet. Judith looked at me. Thank you, Ben. I took the phone back. What did Richard promise them? Mom, I need to go. What did he promise? You need to read the memorandum. Tell me. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. 2 factory closures, consolidation of distribution, transfer of the brand portfolio. And the employees? I don't know. You prepared severance summaries. I prepared legal exposure. How many jobs? I don't know the final number. Give me the range. 250 to 300. Maya closed her eyes. Judith stared toward the rain. Was Richard compensated? I asked. The draft includes an executive transaction bonus. How much? I cannot discuss it. That means yes. Mom and Vanessa? A retention payment. How much? Please stop. Did you know Plant 1 was on the closure list? He said nothing. That was answer enough. 300 families, I said. And you said nothing. I thought the board would review it. The board has not seen it. Dad said he was going to present everything after Vanessa was confirmed. After she controlled the information. I did not understand the full plan. You understood enough to remain silent. He ended the call. I placed the phone on the table for several seconds. None of us spoke. Maya broke the silence. We have a signed memorandum. We know one exists, Judith corrected. We do not possess it. We can demand it at the meeting. Richard will call it privileged. He cannot hide a material commitment from directors. He may try. At 4 that afternoon, Daniel sent a message to my private number. External portal destination identified. Client and administration domain belongs to Halcyon Home Group. Logs preserved. At 5:20, Maya received an alert from an old vendor account she still monitored. Vantage Strategic Partners had issued another invoice. The description read, completion milestone, executive transition readiness. The amount was $400,000. Payable Monday, the day of the board meeting, the day Vanessa expected to become CEO. By evening, the structure of the plan was becoming clear. Vantage had prepared the company for sale. Halcyon had received confidential data. Richard had signed a memorandum without board approval. Vanessa would be appointed CEO. Then the payment would be released. The transaction process would accelerate, and the factories would be placed on the closure list. But one detail still did not make sense. Why does Vanessa need the CEO title before Halcyon completes due diligence? I asked. Maya turned the preliminary agreement toward herself. To control the transition. Richard already controls the current process. Perhaps Halcyon wants someone who will remain after the sale. Judith leaned forward. Find the employment provisions. They are not in this document. What about Vanessa's proposed contract? Maya opened the files she had copied from the financial system. There were drafts of salary projections, incentive plans, and retention arrangements. One document contained a short reference. Post-closing leadership terms governed by Schedule 7. We did not have Schedule 7. but Vantage's invoice contained a file reference number. Maya searched it across the archived payment attachments. A document appeared, not Schedule 7 itself. An email from Vanessa to Nathan Cole. The message was short. Richard believes he will remain chairman for 3 years. Halcyon can use the 6-month termination option after closing. Do not include it in the version sent to his office. Once he secures the board vote, Evelyn will no longer matter. I read it twice. Richard believed he was selling the company to preserve his power. Vanessa was selling him too. Maya looked almost stunned. She is planning to remove him. 6 months after closing, Judith said. Does he know? No. How can you be certain? I pointed to the final sentence. Do not include it in the version sent to his office. Richard had betrayed me for Vanessa. Vanessa had betrayed Richard for Halcyon. And Halcyon intended to eliminate both Vale and Mercer from the company's future. Judith pushed the laptop away. This proves her conflict. It does not prove Richard saw the concealed schedule. He saw enough, I said. Do not make the mistake of excusing him, because someone planned to betray him later. I won't. The rain had stopped. Night reflected against the library windows, turning the glass into a dark mirror. I saw myself seated between Maya and Judith. 3 women Richard had underestimated for different reasons. A wife he believed too hurt to think. A financial officer he treated like an accountant. An independent director he assumed would value politeness over duty. What happens Monday? Maya asked. Richard presents Vanessa. Then, we ask about Vantage. He denies knowledge. We show the related party connection. He says it was disclosed to legal. We demand the memorandum. He claims privilege. Then Daniel confirms the data transfer. Judith shook her head. Not yet. If you reveal every piece before the vote, Richard may adjourn the meeting and call another after removing access or pressuring directors. She was right. We could not simply expose what we knew. We had to control the timing. What do you suggest? I asked. Let him believe the vote remains his safest option. And after the tie? Judith looked at me. After the tie, we find out whether your old provision is as powerful as you remember. At that moment my phone rang. Samuel Reed, I answered. I found the charter, he said. My grip tightened around the phone. And? The provision's still enforceable? I need to review the amendments. How long? A few hours, Samuel. His voice softened. Evelyn, Richard may have forgotten that share. But forgetting a right does not terminate it. I looked at Maya, at Judith, at the email proving Vanessa intended to remove the man she had used. Richard believed he was walking into Monday's meeting with 3 votes and a future CEO. He did not know Vanessa had already negotiated his exit, and he still had no idea that one old share might allow me to end the entire plan with a single word. Samuel arrived at my house shortly after 8 on Sunday morning. He carried an old leather briefcase scarred at the corners and darkened around the handle from decades of use. I had seen that briefcase in hospital rooms, bank offices, and our first board meetings. It had rested on the kitchen floor the night Richard and I signed the loan that nearly cost us our home. Samuel looked smaller than I remembered, but his eyes remained clear. You have not slept, he said as he entered. Neither have you. At my age, sleep is unreliable, documents are not. I led him to the library. Maya was already there. Judith had joined by video call because she did not want her car seen outside my house the day before the vote. Samuel placed the briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were several folders, a bound copy of the original corporate charter and a narrow cream envelope bearing the old Vale and Mercer seal. The same type of envelope remained inside my safe upstairs. Samuels removed the bound charter carefully. The first question, he said, is whether the founder share protection survived all subsequent amendments. And did it? Yes. The words settled over the room. Maya leaned closer. Samuel opened the charter to a page marked with a blue tab. The provision was adopted during the 2003 recapitalization. It created one Class A founder share. He traced the paragraph with one finger. The share has no enhanced economic value. It does not receive additional dividends. It does not give its holder unilateral control of normal business. But, Maya asked. But it carries a special tie-breaking right in 3 categories of extraordinary action. He read them aloud. The appointment or removal of a chief executive officer, the sale, merger, or transfer of controlling interest in the corporation, the disposition of material operating assets representing more than 25% of company productive capacity. Plant 1 and Plant 3 together exceeded that threshold. I felt something inside me become still, not relief, clarity. Who holds the share? Judith asked through the laptop. Samuel looked at me. Evelyn does. Maya smiled for the first time in 2 days. Samuel did not. There are limitations. Of course there are, I said. The right applies only if the board is evenly divided after all eligible directors have voted. 6 directors. 3-3. If no one abstains, what if Richard argues that he is entitled to break the tie as chairman? The founder share clause supersedes the general chairman provision for those 3 categories. What if he tries to remove me from the board first? If the removal vote occurs before the CEO appointment and he secures 4 votes, you lose the director vote, but not ownership of the share. No. However, the clause states the founder shareholder must also be a serving director when casting the deciding vote. Richard's agenda suddenly made perfect sense. Appointment of CEO, strategic restructuring, review of my continued board service. The order listed CEO first, but agendas could be amended by majority vote. If Richard moved my removal to the beginning and Thomas supported him, my deciding vote would disappear. He plans to remove me before Vanessa's appointment, I said. Possibly, Judith replied. Can he? Not without cause or the required vote. He will claim I am interfering because of the affair. Samuel closed the charter. Then you must separate the marriage from the governance issue completely. I already have. Continue doing so. Do not discuss infidelity in the meeting unless it relates directly to undisclosed conflicts. Vanessa's relationship with Richard is an undisclosed conflict. Yes, but if you begin with betrayal, he will say this is domestic retaliation. Begin with money, documents, authority. Maya nodded. The language that survives in court. Judith almost smiled through the screen. Samuel removed a second document. This is the amendment history. Richard signed every relevant revision. None revoked the Class A provision. Did he know it still existed? Maya asked. He should have. That was not my question. Samuel looked toward the window. Richard often treated corporate documents as obstacles to be summarized for him. He never read them, I said. He read the sections that interested him. The memory returned with painful clarity. It was October 2003. Vale and Mercer had expanded too quickly after winning a hotel contract. A supplier failed, interest rates rose, and our line of credit was nearly exhausted. A private investor offered enough money to save us. In return, he wanted veto rights over hiring, assets, and future financing. Richard had wanted to sign immediately. It keeps the company alive, he had said. It turns us into employees, I had replied. We argued for 3 nights. Finally, I proposed another structure. The investor would receive preferred shares and 2 board seats. But 1 founder share would retain a tie-breaking right over the company's most important decisions. Richard had called it dramatic. The investor had called it unreasonable. I had refused to proceed without it. We needed the money, but I would not save the company by giving away its future. Eventually, they agreed. Richard never forgave me for delaying the transaction. Years later, when we repurchased the investor's stake, the founder share remained. We had no reason to use it. Until now. Samuel opened the cream envelope. Inside was the original stock certificate. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. The company seal was embossed in the lower corner. Across the center appeared the words, 1 Class A founder share below them. Issued to Evelyn Rose Mercer, my maiden name. My name before Richard persuaded the company's branding consultants that Vale and Mercer sounded better than Mercer and Vale. Maya stared at the certificate. He genuinely forgot this? He forgot because he never believed Evelyn would use it against him. Samuel said, the words affected me more than they should have, not because Samuel was wrong, because he was exactly right. Richard remembered the provision as something I had created to protect us from outsiders. It had never occurred to him that one day the threat would come from inside our marriage. I touched the edge of the certificate. What is the procedure? You vote as a director. If the result is tied, you formally identify yourself as holder of the Class A founder share and cast the deciding vote. It should be recorded separately in the minutes. Can Richard challenge it? He can challenge anything. Winning is another matter. Could he claim the certificate was lost or cancelled? The company's capitalization records confirm it remains outstanding. I checked the transfer ledger. Does he have access to that ledger? Yes. Then why has he not seen it? Because the ledger contains hundreds of entries, and he likely searched only economic ownership percentages. Maya leaned back. A share with no additional financial value would not appear meaningful. Precisely. Richard measured power by money, Titles and attention. He would never have looked closely at a single share that paid no extra dividend. What happens if Thomas does not vote with Richard? Maya asked. Then there is no tie, Samuel said, and the ordinary majority decides. If Thomas joins us, we win 4-2. If Thomas abstains, the vote could fail depending on quorum and required majority. And if Judith changes her vote? Judith's voice came firmly through the laptop. I will not. Samuel turned to me. You should not build your strategy around the deciding vote alone. I know. A legal right may stop Vanessa's appointment. It does not automatically expose the transaction or remove Richard. I know that too. If you reveal the share before the meeting, Richard may change the agenda, pressure Thomas, or seek an emergency injunction. So we do not reveal it. Samuel nodded. Correct. Maya opened a folder containing the evidence we had assembled. Then our strategy is to force the 3-3 vote. Our strategy, I said, is to let Richard believe he has won until every vote is on the record. Judith's image froze momentarily, then returned. And after you stop Vanessa, we present the evidence. What evidence exactly? Samuel asked. Maya listed it. Payments to Vantage Strategic Partners, Vantage's connection to Vanessa's brother, the Halcyon data portal, preliminary closure plans. The signed memorandum Ben confirmed exists. Samuel lifted one hand. Ben's statement to his mother is not evidence the board can rely upon unless he produces the document. He will, I said. You sound certain. I am not. That was the truth. Ben had ignored my calls since Saturday. He was still standing between fear of his father and responsibility to the company. I did not know which side he would choose. Samuel looked at the document pile. Even with these materials, Richard will argue that the negotiations were preliminary and within his authority. Were they? No chairman has authority to commit the corporation to a change of control transaction without board approval. What about the memorandum? If it is non-binding, he may minimize it. And if it contains exclusivity or a termination payment, then he has exposed the company to liability without authorization. Maya searched her files. The preliminary timeline refers to a completion penalty. How much? Samuel asked. It does not say. Find it. He turned to me. And find proof of personal benefit. That changes this from poor judgment to self-dealing. We have the incentive references. References are not terms. We have Vanessa's email regarding Richard's post-closing removal. That proves Vanessa's intentions, not his. He signed something. Yes, find what he signed. There was no triumph in Samuel's advice, only work. That was reassuring. I had never trusted victories that arrived before the facts. At 10:30, Samuel prepared to leave. He placed the original charter and stock certificate back inside the briefcase. I want the certificate with me, I said. I recommend keeping the original secured until the meeting. Secured where? My office vault. Richard's legal team may contact your firm. They already have. I looked at him. When? Yesterday afternoon. They requested all historical materials related to founder voting rights. The room went silent. Richard might not remember the exact provision. But someone had begun looking for it. Did you respond? I asked. I said archived records required review. Who made the request? Richard's personal counsel. Maya closed her laptop. He suspects something. Or he is checking every possible obstacle, Samuel said. How long before they find the provision? The electronic archive does not include the executed schedule, but they may find the amendment references. By tomorrow morning? Possibly. I looked at the cream envelope. We cannot leave this in your office. Samuel studied me. Where do you suggest? I went upstairs and returned with the matching envelope from my safe. Inside was a photocopy of the certificate and the original correspondence from 2003. Samuel compared the documents. You kept this all these years. I kept everything that once nearly destroyed us. He handed me the original certificate. Then perhaps it belongs with you. I placed it inside my envelope. For years, the paper had rested behind property deeds and insurance policies, a forgotten artifact from a crisis we believed we had survived. Now it was the only document in the room that could turn Richard's certainty into a tie, and the tie into defeat. But Samuel was right. Stopping Vanessa would not save the company. If I used the share only to protect my title, Richard would tell everyone I had acted out of jealousy. He would call another meeting. He would find another candidate. He would continue the Halcyon deal from behind a different name. I needed more than a vote. I needed the signed memorandum, the financial incentives, the evidence of the promised factory closures. I needed every board member to see that Richard was not protecting the company from an aging founder. He was selling it for personal reward. Samuel closed his briefcase. What do you intend to do after you cast the deciding vote? I intend to request an independent investigation. And Richard? If the evidence supports removal, I will move to suspend him. And will you nominate yourself as chief executive? The question surprised Maya. It did not surprise me. Richard would expect me to reclaim the title he had tried to give Vanessa. Everyone would. No. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because this cannot look like two spouses fighting over who gets the larger office. Who then? I looked at Maya. She stared back at me. No, she said immediately. You have run the company's operations for years. I am the CFO. You are also a director. I have never been CEO, neither had Vanessa. That is not an argument in my favor. It is not meant to be. Samuel's mouth curved slightly. Maya shook her head. We are not discussing this before the vote. Agreed, I said. But Richard's greatest defense will be that removing him creates chaos. We need an answer before he asks the question. Judith spoke from the screen. Maya as interim CEO would demonstrate continuity. I have not agreed, Maya said. No one is asking you to agree today, I replied. She gave me a look that said she knew I eventually would. Samuel walked to the doorway. Evelyn, yes? Do not confuse having the deciding vote with having control of the outcome. I won't. The moment Richard realizes he may lose, he will change the conditions. I know. What conditions? The meeting time, the agenda, the directors, access to documents, anything he can reach. Samuel nodded, then assume he already has. Less than an hour after he left, Caroline called. Mrs. Mercer, there has been a change to tomorrow's board meeting. What change? It has been moved from 10 o'clock to 8. Anything else, Mr. Vale added an executive session before the main agenda. Purpose? It only says director eligibility and conflicts of interest. Richard intended to challenge my right to vote before the meeting began. He had not found the founder's share yet, but he was trying to remove the woman who owned it. I looked toward the envelope lying on the library table. The old stock certificate appeared almost insignificant. One piece of paper, one share, one vote. For 30 years, Richard had been the face of Vale and Mercer. He believed the face was the company. He had forgotten that faces could be replaced, foundations could not. And the page he had never bothered to read was about to remind him who had built ours. At 6:45 on Monday morning, the lights on the executive floor were already on. Richard had always arrived early when he wanted other people to feel late. The board meeting was scheduled for 8. But when I stepped out of the elevator, I could hear voices behind the glass wall of the main conference room. George was there, so was Thomas Avery. Richard stood at the head of the table, leaning over a document, as if the three of them were already conducting company business. Vanessa sat to his right. She was not a director. She had no right to attend the executive session. Yet a leather folder and a cup of coffee had been placed in front of her as though her appointment were complete. Caroline rose from her desk when she saw me. Mrs. Mercer, her voice carried a warning. What happened? Your company account was restricted at midnight. I stopped. Restricted how? You can still receive general email, but your access to board archives, finance reports and internal legal files has been removed. By whose authority? The request came from Mr. Vale's office. Was there a board resolution? Not that I saw. I took out my phone and tried to open the board portal. A red message appeared. Access suspended pending real transition. Review. Richard had not waited for the meeting to remove me. He had begun administratively, hoping the board would treat the result as inevitable. Did he restrict Maya? I don't know. Judith? No, only me. Caroline looked uncomfortable. There is something else. She handed me a printed memorandum. It stated that my company-issued laptop, phone and electronic records were subject to a preservation review. Information technology would collect my devices immediately following the board meeting. The language sounded neutral. The purpose was not. Richard intended to seize my access, then accuse me of mishandling whatever evidence remained in my possession. Who drafted this? I asked. Mr. Vale's personal attorney sent it to legal last night. Did Ben approve it? I don't know. I folded the memorandum and placed it in my handbag. Do not give anyone access to my office until the board meeting ends. Caroline hesitated. What if Mr. Vale orders me to? Ask him to put the order in writing. She nodded. Richard's office door opened. Vanessa stepped into the corridor. She wore a cream suit and carried a slim black portfolio. Her expression was composed, but the fingers gripping the portfolio were tense. "Evelyn," she said. "Richard was beginning to wonder whether you would attend. The meeting starts at 8. The executive session begins at 7. The notice said 7:30. It was moved. When, late last night, I was not informed." She gave me a sympathetic look so false it bordered on artistic. "Your email access may have delayed the notification." "You mean the access Richard removed?" "The company is protecting confidential information during a sensitive transition. A transition that has not been approved." Vanessa glanced toward the conference room. "You are going to make this more painful than it needs to be." "For whom?" "For yourself." She stepped closer. "Richard is prepared to offer you a public honorary role. You can keep the founder title. You can attend anniversary events, speak at charitable functions, and remain part of the company's history. You are very generous with things that do not belong to you. I am trying to help." "You are trying to reduce me to a photograph in a lobby." Her gaze sharpened. "People would respect you more if you left with dignity. People who demand your dignity usually mean your silence." Before she could reply, the conference room door opened. George stepped out. He smiled when he saw me, but there was no warmth in it. "Evelyn, we should begin." Thomas appeared behind him, carrying a folder, marked, "Strictly Confidential." I recognized the Halcyon logo beneath his thumb. So Richard had begun showing Thomas selected materials before the formal meeting. "Not the board, Thomas, the director most likely to support a lucrative sale." "Is that board material?" I asked. Thomas looked down at the folder. "Preliminary strategy. Circulated to all directors?" Richard appeared in the doorway. "It will be discussed at the appropriate time." "The appropriate time was before you gave one director information that others have not received." He ignored the accusation. "We are beginning with an executive session to address conflicts of interest." Vanessa remained beside him. "Then she should leave," I said. Richard's expression tightened. "Vanessa is here to answer questions about the leadership transition. She is the subject of the vote. She cannot participate in a closed discussion about director eligibility." George stepped between us with the expression of a man settling an embarrassing family disagreement. "Perhaps we should all lower the temperature." "The temperature is not the issue," I said. "Procedure is." Judith entered the executive floor at that moment wearing a navy suit and carrying no visible documents. She looked from Vanessa to Richard. "Why is a non-director present for executive session?" Richard's voice became more measured. "She will not attend the eligibility discussion." "Then ask her to wait outside." Vanessa looked at him. It was a small moment, but it revealed the balance between them. She expected Richard to defend her presence. He did not. "Give us a few minutes," he said. Vanessa's mouth tightened. She walked toward the reception area without looking at me. Richard stepped back into the conference room. "Now," he said, "shall we begin?" Maya arrived at 7:14. Her access had also been restricted. She showed me the same red message on her phone as we entered the conference room. Richard had prepared nameplates. His sat at the head. George and Thomas were on his right. Judith and Maya were on his left. Mine was placed at the opposite end of the table, farthest from the presentation screen, a symbolic exile. I moved the nameplate to the seat beside Maya. Richard watched but said nothing. Samuel Reed sat behind me as outside counsel to the founder share matter. Richard objected immediately. "This is an internal board session. Samuel is here as my legal advisor. You do not have the right to bring personal counsel. I have the right to counsel when the agenda includes my removal and alleged conflicts." Richard looked toward his attorney, Charles Brent, who sat against the opposite wall. Charles gave a slight nod. Samuel could remain. That appeared to be the first thing that morning. Richard had not controlled. Richard called the meeting to order at 7:20. "The purpose of this executive session," he began, "is to determine whether Evelyn Mercer should participate in matters concerning Vanessa Cole's appointment." Judith leaned back. "On what basis?" "Evelyn's personal relationship with me creates an obvious emotional conflict." Maya's expression did not change, but I saw her thumb press against the edge of her notebook. Richard continued. "She has made accusations arising from our marital separation. Those accusations may impair her ability to exercise independent business judgment." "Are you recusing yourself?" I asked. He looked at me. "Why would I? You have a personal relationship with the candidate. That relationship does not affect my assessment of her qualifications. But my marriage to you affects mine. This is exactly the emotional response I am describing. Samuel leaned forward. Mr. Vale, has your relationship with Miss Cole been disclosed formally to the board? Richard's attorney answered. The board was aware that Mr. Vale and Mrs. Mercer were experiencing marital difficulties. That was not the question, Samuel said. George shifted in his chair. We are all adults here. I do not think anyone needs unnecessary details. The flourishing of a relationship with a proposed chief executive is not an unnecessary detail, Judith said. It is a governance requirement. Thomas looked at Richard. You did not mention this when we spoke yesterday. Richard's face remained calm. I did not believe my private life was relevant. You are nominating the person involved in that private life, Thomas replied. It was the first visible crack in Richard's certainty. He recovered quickly. The appointment is based on performance. Evelyn's objection is based on resentment. My objection, I said, is based on undisclosed payments, unauthorized negotiations, and the transfer of confidential information to Halcyon Home Group. George stared at me. Thomas did not. He already knew something. Richard placed both palms on the table. We will address strategic discussions later. Have you signed a memorandum with Halcyon? I asked. His eyes flickered. Only once, but I saw it. So you have, I said. Charles Brent intervened. Any preliminary document is protected by transaction privilege and subject to confidentiality. Confidential from the board? Maya asked. Confidential pending formal presentation. Maya opened her notebook. Did the document create exclusivity? Charles said nothing. Did it create a termination payment? She continued. Richard looked toward him. That answer was not supposed to be discussed yet. Maya understood, so did Judith. Is the company already financially exposed? Judith asked. Richard's tone hardened. No binding sale has occurred. That was not the question. George lifted a hand. We are drifting from the purpose of this session. No, I said. The purpose is to remove me before I can vote on a transaction Richard has already begun. You are not being removed, Richard said. We are determining whether you should recuse yourself, and if I refuse, the board may decide for you. Richard asked Charles to present a motion stating that I had a conflict of interest regarding Vanessa's appointment and should abstain. Before Charles could begin, Samuel placed a printed copy of the board's conflict policy on the table. The policy requires financial, familial, or personal interests to be disclosed by the director benefiting from the decision, he said. It does not permit one conflicted director to disqualify another, because she objects. Richard's face reddened. I am not financially benefiting from Vanessa's appointment. Are you receiving any payment upon a change of control? Silence. Thomas looked directly at Richard. What payment? Richard turned toward Samuel. You have no basis for that accusation. Samuel did not move, then disclosed that no payment exists. Richard said nothing. The silence became the answer. George cleared his throat. Many transactions include standard executive retention arrangements. Then the board should review them, Judith said. Richard closed the folder before him. This session is becoming unproductive. No, Maya replied. It is becoming informative. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Richard did what Samuel had predicted. He changed the conditions. I am postponing the eligibility motion, he said. We will proceed to the formal agenda. He had failed to remove me. But the meeting had not yet begun. And we still did not possess the document he had signed. At 7:51, while Richard conferred with Charles near the windows, I opened my private phone. There was no message from Ben. I had called him 3 times since Sunday afternoon. No answer. I checked my personal email, nothing. Then an alert appeared from an encrypted file sharing service I did not recognize. A secure folder has been shared with you. The sender field contained only one letter B. My pulse quickened. I opened the message. A password prompt appeared, accompanied by a clue. The name of the street above the hardware store. I knew it immediately. Hawthorne. The street where Richard and I had rented our first office. The folder opened. Inside were 12 files. The first was titled Halcyon. Mauve Understanding. Executed the second. Change-off Control Bonus Schedule third. Plant Closure and Workforce Consolidation Mortal the fourth. Communication Strategy. I opened the memorandum. Richard's signature appeared on the final page, dated 11 days earlier. He had signed on behalf of Vale and Mercer without board authorization. The document granted Halcyon 45 days of exclusive negotiation rights. If Vale and Mercer accepted another offer or ended the process without specified cause, it owed Halcyon a termination payment of $6 million, Richard had placed the company at risk before asking the board's permission. I opened the bonus schedule. His name appeared first, Richard Vale, 12,000 transaction completion incentive. Below it, Vanessa Cole, $4,500,000 appointment and retention incentive. There was no ambiguity left. They were not modernizing the company. They were selling it and paying themselves for the privilege. At the bottom of the encrypted folder was a message. Mom, I'm sorry I waited this long. I'll explain in person. Do not open these on the company network. I looked across the room. Richard was laughing softly at something George had said. He still believed he controlled the documents, the directors and the morning. I downloaded the folder to an encrypted drive Samuel had brought. Then I sent one message to Ben, meet me at Plant 1. Loading entrance. Now the board meeting would begin in less than 10 minutes. But before I used my son's evidence against his father, I needed to know why Ben had finally chosen to send it, and whether he was prepared to stand behind it when Richard accused us both of betrayal. Oz Plant 1 stood 20 minutes from headquarters if traffic was light. At 7:58, traffic was not light. I told the driver to use the service road and called Judith from the back seat. Delay the vote. For how long? 30 minutes. Richard will object. Ask for time to review newly produced material. What material? The memorandum, the bonus schedule, closure projections. There was silence at the other end. You have them? Yes. Where did they come from? Ben, another pause. Are they authentic? I am going to confirm that. Evelyn, leaving the meeting may allow Richard to proceed without you. Not if you refuse to establish quorum. Maya, you and I are only 3. Exactly. Under the company bylaws, 4 directors were required for a valid vote. If Judith and Maya left the room, Richard, George and Thomas could talk, threaten and rehearse, but they could not act. I'll handle it, Judith said. The call ended. I looked at the files again. The board communication strategy was colder than the financial documents. It contained proposed phrases for employee announcements, operational consolidation, strategic footprint optimization, difficult but necessary decisions. Now here did it say that 287 people would lose their jobs. Now here did it say Richard would receive $12 million. One section described me. Potential resistance from legacy founder may be characterized as emotional response to succession and marital transition. I read the sentence twice. They had planned my public discrediting before the anniversary party. The humiliation had not been spontaneous. It was part of the transaction strategy. If I objected, they would call me jealous. If I exposed the affair, they would call me unstable. If I defended the factories, they would say I feared change. Richard had not merely chosen Vanessa over me. He had turned my predictable pain into a business tool. The driver pulled beside the loading entrance at Plant 1. Ben was waiting beneath the metal awning. He wore the same suit he had worn to headquarters, but his tie was loose and his hair damp from the rain. I stepped from the car. For several seconds, neither of us moved. My son looked older than 31, not mature, burdened. Are the files real? I asked. Yes. Did you alter anything? No. Did you remove them from legal? I copied them from the transaction drive. Who has access? Dad, Charles, Vanessa, me and 2 halcyon attorneys. Does Richard know you sent them? Not yet. Will he? When the documents appear in the meeting, yes. I looked toward the factory doors. A forklift moved inside. Somewhere beyond the loading area, metal struck metal in a steady rhythm. Why here? Ben asked. Because this is one of the factories your father agreed to close. His face tightened. I know. Do you? Yes. How many people work here? 214. How many names did you see in the severance model? I didn't see names. That makes it easier. He looked away. I deserve that. Yes. The answer surprised him. Perhaps he had expected me to soften because he was my son. I had spent too many years softening consequences for the men in my family. I need the truth, I said. Not the version that protects you. Ben nodded slowly. Dad asked legal to prepare a preliminary change of control package about 2 months ago. He said the board wanted options. The board did not. I know that now. When did you learn about Vanessa? Last summer, nearly a year. The pain arrived without warning. I kept my voice steady. How? I saw them together in London. You were on that trip? Dad asked me to join a client dinner. Vanessa came to his hotel suite afterward. And you said nothing. He told me the marriage was already over. Did I look as though I knew that? No. Then why did you believe him? Ben closed his eyes. Because I wanted to. The factory noise continued behind us. Why? He said you had stopped loving him. He said you both stayed together for the company and family appearances. And that seemed believable. You were always working, he was always traveling. I thought maybe there were things between you I didn't understand. There were. That did not give him the right to invent my consent. I know. When did he promise you a promotion? Ben's eyes opened. How did you know? Because Richard rarely asks for silence without offering something in return. He said after the transition I would become general counsel. You are 4 years out of practice. I told him I wasn't ready, but you did not refuse. No. At the party, did you know Vanessa would be announced? I knew she was the likely nominee. Did you know he would announce it publicly before the vote? No. Did you know about Halcyon? I knew there were discussions. I didn't know he had signed the memorandum until Charles asked me to review the termination clause. When? 10 days ago. Before the anniversary party. Yes. And still you said nothing. I told myself the board would stop anything improper. The board cannot stop what it does not know exists. I understand that, do you? He flinched. I wanted to embrace him. That was the mother in me. The director in me needed him to understand that remorse was not the same as repair. What changed? I asked, then looked through the loading doors toward the factory floor. Friday night, Dad asked me to prepare draft notices terminating the employment of 6 senior managers, plant directors, distribution, corporate compliance, people who could resist the sale. Yes, then? I found an internal strategy memo. It said you would be blamed if the transaction collapsed. The document in the folder? He nodded. They planned to say your opposition frightened Halcyon, triggered the termination fee, and damaged shareholder value. So Richard could use the $6 million penalty he created to accuse me of harming the company. Yes. Did he write it? The memo came from Vantage, but Dad approved the communications plan. The betrayal settled into a new shape. Richard had built a trap. If I accepted Vanessa, I lost the company. If I opposed her, he would use the transaction penalty to blame me for the cost. Ben reached inside his jacket and removed a small flash drive. This contains the original metadata and email chains. The files I sent you are copies. Why bring it here? Because Charles issued a preservation notice covering your licenses, but not mine yet. Once the meeting begins, Dad may order IT to collect everything. Daniel has preserved the server logs. You spoke to Daniel? He understood his responsibilities. The implication landed, Ben had not. I'm sorry, he said again. Stop saying that. His face tightened. What do you want me to say? The truth in the boardroom. He stared at me. You want me to testify against Dad? I want you to answer questions about documents you reviewed. He'll fire me. Yes. He may report me for taking files. Yes, I could lose my position. Yes. He looked almost angry. You say that as if it means nothing. It means a great deal, but 287 employees are also about to lose their positions. They were not offered $12 million for the inconvenience. He looked down at the flash drive in his hand. I did not create this plan. No, you protected it. I was scared. So are the people inside this building. They simply do not know it yet. Ben pressed his lips together. I lowered my voice. Your father spent years teaching you that loyalty means protecting him from consequences. It does not. What does it mean? It means protecting what deserves protection. He looked toward the factory again. A woman in a safety vest pushed a cart past the open loading door. She saw us and smiled. Morning, Mrs. Mercer. Good morning, Teresa. Ben watched her disappear inside. You know her? She has worked here 22 years. He swallowed. Dad said the factory was inefficient. It is less efficient than the automated facility Halcyon owns, so closing it may make financial sense, perhaps. But financial sense must be presented honestly. You do not secretly promise closures, hide personal bonuses, and ask the board to approve the plan after it has become expensive to refuse. He nodded. I'll come back. To the meeting? Yes. Will you answer Richard's questions, if they are about the documents? All questions. He met my eyes. Yes. I took the flash drive. What happens to me after this? He asked. That depends on what you do next. I mean with you. I looked at my son, the boy who had once waited outside my office after school, drawing furniture designs on the backs of invoices, the young man who had become so desperate for his father's approval that he had confused silence with love. I do not know, I said. It was the most honest answer I could give him, but telling the truth is where we begin. My phone rang. Maya. Richard is threatening to proceed, she said as soon as I answered. Is there quorum? No. Judith and I stepped out. Thomas is furious. Why? Richard showed him a projected sale premium but not the termination payment. Thomas has just learned the company is already committed to exclusivity. Good, not entirely. Richard says he will reconvene at 9 and treat your absence as an abstention. He cannot. He is willing to try. Tell Judith to demand production of the signed memorandum before any vote. She already did. And Charles says it is not relevant to Vanessa's appointment. I looked at Ben. He is coming with me. Maya was silent for a moment. Does Richard know? He will soon. We returned to the car. As we drove back downtown, Ben sat beside me with both hands clasped between his knees. He looked like a defendant waiting for a verdict. I did not comfort him. Some fear was useful. It showed us where our courage was required. At 8:42, the headquarters building came into view. A cluster of employees stood near the entrance, phones in hand, whispering. Vanessa's team had released an internal announcement declaring that she would address the company at 10:30 as its incoming chief executive officer. The vote had not taken place, yet promotional photographs of Vanessa already filled the lobby screens. Ben stared at them as we entered. She knew she had not been confirmed. Yes, then why announce it? To make the board feel that reversing the decision would create chaos. The elevator doors closed. I looked at my reflection beside my son's. That is how your father operates. He creates a public fact, then asks everyone else to protect him from the embarrassment of correcting it. What are you going to do? Correct it. When the elevator opened, Richard stood at the far end of the corridor. He saw Ben beside me. His expression changed. Not shock, recognition. He knew immediately. You, he said. Ben stopped walking. Richard crossed the corridor. What did you do? Ben's face lost color, but he remained where he was. I gave Mom the transaction documents. George appeared in the conference room doorway. Thomas stood behind him. Vanessa rose from a chair near reception. Richard stared at his son as if he no longer recognized him. You stole privileged material. I preserved evidence of an unauthorized transaction. You have no idea what you have done. I know exactly what the documents say. I gave you a future in this company. Ben's voice shook. You asked me to help destroy it. Richard took one step closer. You are terminated. I moved between them. You can address Ben's employment after the board reviews the evidence. This is not your decision. No, I said. That is the point. It is not yours either. Behind us, the conference room clock showed 8:57. 3 minutes until Richard intended to reconvene. He looked at me. Then at the leather case Samuel carried. For the first time since the anniversary party, I saw fear in my husband's eyes. He no longer wondered whether I knew. He wondered how much. At 9 o'clock, all 6 directors took their seats. Vanessa remained outside. Richard had wanted her inside, but Thomas objected. That mattered. Less than 2 hours earlier, Thomas had appeared firmly aligned with Richard. Now he sat with the halcyon folder closed in front of him, and a legal pad covered in questions. George remained beside Richard. Judith and Maya sat on either side of me. Ben occupied a chair against the back wall beside Samuel. Charles Brent sat opposite them, speaking quietly to Richard. The promotional screens in the lobby continued showing Vanessa's portrait, a new era for Vale and Mercer through the conference room glass. I could see employees stopping to look at it. The company had not entered a new era, it had entered a hostage situation disguised as branding. Richard struck the table lightly with the wooden gavel he used for formal meetings. This special meeting of the board will reconvene. Judith spoke immediately. Before any vote, the board requires complete production of all agreements with Halcyon Home Group and Vantage Strategic Partners. Richard did not look at her. The transaction materials are not part of the CEO appointment agenda. They are directly connected, Maya said. The strategic process is preliminary. You signed an exclusivity memorandum, I replied. The room became silent. Richard looked at Ben. My son did not look away. Charles leaned forward. Any document obtained through unauthorized disclosure should not be considered by the board. Thomas turned toward him. Is the memorandum authentic? That is not the issue. It is the only issue I care about at this moment. Charles glanced at Richard. Richard answered. It is a non-binding memorandum intended to establish a framework for discussion. Does it include a $6 million termination payment? Thomas asked. Richard's jaw tightened. Only under limited circumstances. Thomas opened his folder. You showed me a model based on a 28% premium. You did not disclose that the company was already subject to an exclusivity restriction. The restriction is temporary. Nor did you disclose your transaction bonus. George shifted in his chair. What bonus? Maya slid a document across the table. The title was visible to everyone. Change of control bonus. Richard did not touch it. George did. His eyes moved down the page. $12 million? It is contingent compensation, Richard said. Standard in transactions of this size. Approved by whom? Judith asked. It would be approved as part of the final package. You negotiated your own compensation before presenting the transaction to the board. I negotiated nothing. Halcyon proposed retention incentives. Your name appears under transaction completion, not retention, Maya said. Thomas turned to the next page. And Vanessa receives $4.5 million upon appointment and continued service after closing. Richard's voice sharpened. The payments ensure leadership continuity. I looked at him. You mean the leadership you announced publicly before the board voted? He ignored me. Thomas read further. Plant 1 and Plant 3 are scheduled for closure, subject to operational review. 287 employees are listed for termination. Potential reduction. Have they been told? No, has the board. We are discussing it now. No, Thomas said. We are discovering it now. That distinction hung in the room. Richard looked toward George for support. George placed the bonus schedule down. Richard, why did you not tell me about the payment? Because there is no final agreement. You asked me to support Vanessa because she would protect the company. She will. The company you intend to sell. The company must evolve. Into Halcyon, Richard's patience broke. We cannot continue pretending Vail and Mercer can compete indefinitely as an independent regional manufacturer. Margins are shrinking. International competitors are scaling faster. Digital acquisition costs have doubled. Halcyon offers capital, distribution, and security. The argument was not entirely false. That made it more dangerous. Vail and Mercer did face pressure. Some facilities needed modernization. Certain product lines were declining, but difficult circumstances did not excuse secret self-dealing. If the transaction is necessary, I said. Why did you conceal it? I was protecting the process from disruption. From the board? From people emotionally attached to outdated assets. Meaning me. Meaning anyone incapable of making rational decisions. You wrote the communication strategy before presenting the deal. Richard's eyes moved toward the document pile. I continued. You plan to describe my opposition as an emotional response to our marital separation. That language came from an outside advisor. You approved it. It was a scenario. You created a $6 million penalty and planned to blame me if the board refused to proceed. Richard leaned back. This meeting is about Vanessa's qualifications. No, Judith said. It is about whether the board can rely on any information you present concerning her. Maya opened her laptop. I have prepared a summary of payments to Vantage Strategic Partners. The screen behind Richard illuminated. A table appeared showing 17 invoices totaling just under $2.2 million, including the $400,000 payment scheduled for that day. Vantage was retained without a defined board-approved scope. Maya said. The firm is indirectly controlled by Nathan Cole, Vanessa Cole's brother. George looked toward Richard. Did you know that? Richard's answer came too slowly. I was aware of a family connection. Was it disclosed? Judith asked. It was not material. $2 million is material, Maya said. Vantage delivered legitimate transaction services for a transaction the board had not authorized. Richard's voice rose. The chairman has authority to explore strategic alternatives. Explore, Samuel said from behind me, is not the same as grant exclusivity, expose the company to a termination payment and negotiate personal compensation. Charles objected. You are not a director. No, Samuel replied. I am the lawyer who drafted the authority provisions Mr. Vail has exceeded. Richard turned toward him. This company has not used you as counsel in years. The charter has. For one brief moment, Richard's expression changed. He knew Samuel had not come merely to advise me about the affair. He looked at the leather briefcase beside Samuel's chair. Then at me. He was beginning to remember, not the exact provision, but the crisis in 2003, the investor, the arguments, the document he had signed without reading beyond the financial terms. Richard closed the Halcyon folder. We can spend the entire morning debating a transaction that may never occur, or we can address the leadership problem in front of us. Agreed. George said. He spoke too quickly. Perhaps he wanted to move away from the bonus schedule before he had to reconsider his own loyalty. Richard stood. He walked to the presentation screen and replaced Maya's financial table with Vanessa's leadership deck. Her photograph appeared beside the words, vision, growth, transformation. This company needs a chief executive capable of leading it through rapid change, he said. Vanessa has increased digital engagement, modernized our market identity, and developed partnerships that will position us for global expansion. Her division exceeded its budget by 31%, Maya said. Investment requires spending. Online revenue growth was lower last year than in the previous 2 years, because the previous strategy relied on discounting. Customer acquisition costs rose 40% under her campaign. Richard looked toward Thomas. Vanessa's leadership should be assessed as a whole, not reduced to selective metrics. Then let us assess it, I said. Richard's eyes narrowed. I turned toward the glass wall. Ask her to enter. He hesitated. This was not what he expected. He thought I would object to Vanessa's presence. He thought I would avoid confronting her, because doing so would make the affair visible. Bring her in, Thomas said. Richard nodded to Charles. A moment later, Vanessa entered. She carried herself as though she had already won. Her cream suit was immaculate. The emerald ring on her hand caught the light as she placed her portfolio on the table. She took the chair beside Richard. Thank you for allowing me to address the board, she said. Richard gave her an encouraging smile. Vanessa, please summarize your plan for the company. She stood and began her presentation. For 20 minutes she spoke about transformation. She described younger consumers, global licensing, digital showrooms, and strategic partnerships. Her slides showed bright homes, diverse families, and elegant furniture, suspended against white backgrounds. She did not mention Halcyon. She did not mention Vantage. She did not mention factory closures or employee terminations. She presented the future while hiding its price. When she finished, Richard thanked her. Questions? I opened the gray folder in front of me. Vanessa looked at it. Her confidence faltered. Only slightly. Vantage Strategic Partners, I said. How much has Vale and Mercer paid them? She glanced at Richard. I do not manage accounts payable. You authorize the invoices. My department confirmed receipt of services. What services? Strategic advisory work. Related to branding? Among other matters. Related to Halcyon Home Group. Her eyes moved toward Charles. This is confidential transaction information, so the work was connected to Halcyon. I did not say that. Your brother owns Vantage. George looked at her. Vanessa remained composed. My brother is one of several advisors associated with the firm. He is the director of the company that controls it. I do not manage his business interests. Did you disclose the relationship? I believed Richard's office had handled all appropriate disclosures. She had shifted responsibility within seconds, Richard noticed. What information did you send to Halcyon's transaction portal? I asked. I did not personally send anything to Halcyon. Did someone using your credentials upload customer contracts, supplier terms, and workforce reduction models? I would need to review the technical details. Did you authorize it? Due diligence information was shared under Richard's direction. The room became still. She had admitted it. Perhaps she realized too late. Maya spoke. Due diligence for what? Vanessa folded her hands. For a potential strategic partnership. Acquisition? Judith asked. I was not responsible for defining the transaction structure, yet your compensation depends on closing, Thomas said. Vanessa looked at the bonus schedule. I have not seen that version. Richard turned toward her. It was the first time he looked uncertain about an answer she had given. What version have you seen? I asked. Vanessa's eyes returned to me. I have discussed a standard retention package. Does it include becoming CEO before the transaction? My appointment is independent of any potential transaction. Then why is Vantage's $400,000 completion invoice payable on the day of your confirmation? That would be a question for Vantage. Why does the Halcyon timeline state that the transaction process begins 30 days after your appointment? The timing may be coincidental. Why does your email to Nathan Cole say, once Richard has secured the board vote, Evelyn will no longer matter? The color left her face. Richard turned slowly toward her. What email? I slid the printed message across the table. Vanessa did not pick it up. Richard did. His eyes moved across the page. I watched him reach the line concerning his own removal. Richard believes he will remain chairman for 3 years. Halcyon can use the 6-month termination option after closing. Do not include it in the version sent to his office. He read it again. Then he looked at Vanessa. What 6-month termination option? Vanessa. The post-closing documents have gone through multiple drafts. You told me I would remain chairman. That is what I negotiated. Then what is this? It may be an earlier proposal. The lie was too quick. Richard knew it. For the first time, the alliance between them cracked in public. But betrayal by Vanessa did not make Richard innocent. It only made him careless. I leaned forward. You signed a deal you did not fully understand, I said. Richard looked at me with fury. This is not the time. It is exactly the time. You asked the board to trust your judgment while concealing the transaction, your payment, and the fact that the woman you nominated was negotiating your removal. Vanessa straightened. I reject that characterization. Then explain the email. My brother and I discussed possible outcomes. You discussed removing Richard after he secured the vote. I discussed protecting the transaction. From whom? She looked at me. There it was, the truth beneath every euphemism. From me, from Maya, from Judith, from the factories. From anyone who might interfere with the money. Richard closed the email. We will take a 10-minute recess. No, Thomas said. Richard frowned at him. We have enough information to vote. George looked alarmed. Surely we should review the documents first. We should have reviewed them before Richard signed. Thomas turned toward Vanessa. I have one question. If appointed CEO, will you suspend the Halcyon process until an independent review is complete? Vanessa paused. I would need to consider the company's legal obligations. That is not an answer. The exclusivity agreement may limit our options. An agreement you helped prepare without board approval. I acted under the chairman's authority. And now you want the board to reward that conduct with the chief executive position. Vanessa looked toward Richard. He no longer looked at her. Thomas closed his legal pad. I am ready to vote. Richard's expression hardened. He had lost control of the discussion. So he reached for the only thing he believed he still controlled, the formal motion. He returned to the head of the table. The chair moves that Vanessa Cole be appointed Chief Executive Officer of Vale & Mercer Interiors, effective immediately. George seconded the motion. Judith asked that each vote be recorded individually. Richard agreed. He looked toward me once. Perhaps he expected me to reveal the founder share. I did not. Not yet. Samuel's warning remained clear. Let every director vote first. Let Richard believe his 3 votes were enough. Let the tie exist before I broke it. The corporate secretary prepared the roll call. Outside the conference room, Vanessa's image remained on the lobby screens. Employees stood beneath it, waiting for an announcement. Richard placed both hands on the table. Call the vote. And one by one, the directors began choosing what kind of company Vale & Mercer would become. The corporate secretary began with Richard. Mr. Vale? Richard did not hesitate. Yes. The word landed with the confidence of a verdict. He folded his hands on the table and looked toward Vanessa, who sat beside him with her chin raised. For one brief moment, they appeared exactly as they had planned to appear at the anniversary party. United, modern, and inevitable. The secretary turned to George. Mr. Ellison? George looked down at the bonus schedule in front of him. $12 million for Richard. $4.5 million for Vanessa. 2 factories closed. 287 employees removed from the payroll. He had known Richard for 32 years. He had once loaned us money without a contract because he trusted Richard's handshake. Now that trust was asking him to ignore documents bearing Richard's signature, George rubbed one thumb along the edge of the page. Yes, he said at last. Judith's expression did not change. Maya wrote something in her notebook. I watched George carefully. His vote was not based on evidence. It was based on history. He was not protecting the company. He was protecting his belief that the man beside him could not have become someone he no longer recognized. The secretary looked toward Thomas. Mr. Avery? Thomas did not answer immediately. He opened the Halcyon folder and reviewed the first page of the valuation summary. Richard's expression remained calm, but the muscles in his jaw had tightened. Thomas represented a fund that owned 14% of Vale & Mercer. His responsibility was not to preserve our memories, protect our marriage, or save Richard's reputation. His responsibility was financial return. Halcyon's projected offer would produce a significant premium. Even after learning about the hidden bonuses and the unauthorized memorandum, Thomas still had to consider whether rejecting Vanessa might reduce the company's value. He looked at Richard. Will you agree that Vanessa's appointment does not constitute authorization to proceed with the Halcyon transaction? Richard answered quickly. Yes. Vanessa turned slightly toward him. Thomas continued. Will all material transaction decisions be submitted to the board? Yes. Will the exclusivity memorandum and all related agreements be reviewed by independent counsel? Richard's attorney shifted in his chair. Yes, Richard said again. Will you suspend payment of the $400,000 Vantage invoice pending review? A pause, then Richard said, If the board requests it, I am requesting it. Richard forced a smile. Then yes. Thomas closed the folder. The company requires stable leadership while the transaction questions are investigated. I do not approve of how this process has been handled, but I also do not believe we should create an executive vacuum today. My stomach tightened. He had found a way to separate Vanessa from the misconduct that had placed her in front of us. At least he had convinced himself he had. Mr. Avery? The secretary repeated. Thomas looked directly at Vanessa. Yes, 3 votes. Richard George. Thomas. Vanessa released a breath so quietly that most people would not have noticed I did. Richard leaned back. He believed it was over. The secretary turned to Maya. Ems Chen? No. Her voice was calm, no explanation, no apology, just the answer. Richard's eyes moved toward her. Maya did not look at him. Palmer? No. Judith closed the file in front of her. The nominee participated in undisclosed related party payments, unauthorized data transfers and transaction preparation that was concealed from this board. My vote is no. The secretary made a note. Then she turned to me. Mrs. Mercer? Richard watched my face. Behind him, the presentation screen still displayed Vanessa's photograph. Vision. Growth. Transformation. I thought about the old factory, about Teresa pushing her cart through the loading entrance, about the employees beneath Vanessa's image in the lobby, waiting to learn whether decisions about their lives had already been made. I thought about my son, sitting behind me after finally choosing truth over advancement, and I thought about the papers Richard had placed beside our bed. Retirement, silence. My voting proxy. He had not simply expected me to lose, he had expected me to participate in my own removal. No, I said. The secretary looked down at the tally. For the record, the vote is 3 in favor and 3 opposed. Richard immediately leaned forward. As chairman, I cast the deciding vote in favor. The motion passes. Vanessa smiled. George nodded as though order had finally been restored. Thomas remained still. I did not move, neither did Samuel. The secretary hesitated with her pen above the minutes. Richard looked at her. Record the appointment. Samuel stood. No, Richard. Richard's eyes shifted toward him. You do not address the chair without recognition. I am addressing an error before it becomes a fraudulent corporate record. Charles Brent rose halfway from his seat. That is an outrageous characterization. Samuel ignored him. The chairman does not possess the tie-breaking vote for the appointment of a chief executive officer. Richard's expression became almost amused. The bylaws state that the chairman breaks an evenly divided vote. The general bylaws do. Then, sit down. But the general provision is superseded by the 2003 Founder Share Amendment for 3 categories of extraordinary corporate action. The amusement disappeared. George frowned. What Founder Share Amendment? Richard looked at me. I watched the memory return in fragments. A failing credit line, a private investor, 3 nights of arguments, Samuel's old briefcase on our kitchen floor. Richard had remembered enough to search historical records, but not enough to understand what he was searching for. That provision was connected to the old investor recapitalization, he said. It was adopted during that recapitalization, Samuel replied. It was not terminated when the investors' preferred shares were repurchased. Charles opened his laptop. I have reviewed the electronic charter. There is no operative enhanced founder vote. The electronic summary does not contain the executed share schedule. Samuel reached for his case. Richard's voice hardened. Whatever you think you have, it is outdated. Samuel removed the bound charter and placed it on the table. This is the executed version. Charles held out a hand. Samuel did not give it to him. Instead, he opened the document to the blue-marked page and slid it toward the corporate secretary. Please read the highlighted paragraph aloud. Richard stood. This meeting will recess while counsel reviews the document. No, Judith said. He turned toward her. The vote has been called. All 6 directors have voted. The result has been announced as a tie. You cannot recess merely because you dislike the governing provision that now applies. I am entitled to confirm its validity. You should have confirmed it before declaring yourself the deciding vote. Thomas leaned toward the document. What exactly does it say? The secretary looked at Richard. He gave no permission. Judith spoke firmly. You are secretary to the board, not personal secretary to the chairman. Read it. The secretary swallowed, then she read. In the event of an equal division of the board concerning the appointment or removal of a chief executive officer, any merger or transfer of controlling interest, or any disposition of material operating assets, the holder of the outstanding class of founder share shall possess the exclusive right to cast one deciding vote. No one spoke, the secretary continued. Such right shall supersede any general tie-breaking authority of the chairperson with respect to the specified matters. Vanessa stared at the page. George looked from Samuel to Richard. Thomas asked the question everyone was waiting for. Who holds the class of founder share? Samuel opened the cream envelope. He removed the stock certificate and placed it on the table with both hands. The paper looked almost fragile beneath the conference room lights. At its center were the words. One class of founder share beneath them. Issued to Evelyn Rose Merker. Vanessa's face became completely still. Richard did not look at the certificate. He looked at me. You planned this. The accusation almost made me laugh. I planned it 23 years ago. That share was meant to protect the company from outside investors. It was meant to protect the company from anyone attempting to take control without proper approval. I am not an outside investor. No, that is what makes this worse. Charles reached for the certificate. Samuel placed one hand over it. You may review a certified copy. The original remains with the holder. Charles looked at Richard. We need time to determine whether the share was cancelled in any subsequent recapitalization. It was not, Samuel said. You cannot establish that merely by presenting an old certificate. The transfer ledger lists the share as outstanding. Every subsequent charter amendment preserved rights not expressly modified. No amendment modified this right. Richard turned to the secretary. Do not record any deciding vote until council completes a review. Judith shook her head. The document is facially valid, the share is recorded as outstanding, and the provision applies to the motion already before us. George looked at me. Evelyn, perhaps we should pause. There is no need to turn this into a spectacle. I held his gaze. The spectacle was held Thursday night. His eyes dropped. Thomas picked up the certified copy Samuel had prepared. Did you know about this, Richard? Richard did not answer. That silence mattered, not because he had forgotten, because he had known enough to request the archives and still proceeded without informing the board. Vanessa looked at him. You told me there were no remaining founder controls. Richard's head turned sharply. This is not the time. You said Evelyn's shares had no special rights. I said they had no additional economic rights. That is not what you said. Their voices carried the first signs of panic. The alliance that had once seemed polished and certain was beginning to disintegrate under the weight of one yellowed piece of paper. Thomas placed the copy down. The motion remains tied. Yes, Judith said. And the founder shareholder is entitled to break it. Everyone turned toward me. I had imagined this moment during the sleepless hours of the previous night. In some versions, I gave a speech. In others, I read every insult Richard and Vanessa had used against me and returned each one in front of the board. But the company did not need a wounded wife, it needed a director. I placed both hands flat on the table. As holder of the outstanding Class A founder share, I cast the deciding vote on the motion to appoint Vanessa Cole as Chief Executive Officer. Vanessa stared at me. Richard looked as though he wanted to stop the next word by force. I did not raise my voice. No, the secretary's pen moved across the minutes. The motion fails by deciding vote. Outside the conference room, Vanessa's face still filled every screen. Inside, she was no longer the incoming CEO. She was a director of brand development who had just lost the largest gamble of her life. Richard pushed back his chair. This meeting is adjourned. No, I said, his eyes locked onto mine. We have finished one motion. We have not finished the agenda. Richard remained standing at the head of the table. His chair had rolled backward and struck the wall behind him. No one moved to retrieve it. The meeting is adjourned, he repeated. Judith opened the bylaws. The chair may not unilaterally adjourn while directors have pending motions, and a quorum remains present. There are no pending motions, there will be. I looked at Maya. She had not expected me to act so quickly, but she understood. Richard's greatest remaining advantage was chaos. If we left the room without establishing temporary leadership, he would continue exercising chairman authority. He could dismiss employees, restrict documents, pressure Thomas, and call another meeting after challenging the founder's share in court. Stopping Vanessa was not enough. We had to prevent Richard from continuing the transaction before an independent review. I spoke to the secretary. Please record a new motion. Richard struck the table with his palm. You do not control the agenda. Any director may introduce a motion relevant to the matters properly before a special meeting. Charles Brent shook his head. The notice did not include suspension of the chairman. The notice includes authorization of strategic restructuring and review of director conduct. Samuel replied. The chairman's unauthorized actions are directly related. Richard turned toward Thomas. You agreed that the company needs stability. Thomas closed his Halcyon folder. It does. Then you understand why this cannot become a personal takeover. A takeover by whom? Richard gestured toward me. Evelyn. I shook my head. I am not nominating myself. That stopped him. It stopped Vanessa too. For several seconds the room was silent. Richard had prepared arguments against a jealous wife reclaiming power. He had not prepared for a director who did not want his chair. I continued. I move that Maya Chen be appointed interim chief executive officer, effective immediately. Pending an independent investigation of the Halcyon transaction, related party payments and unauthorized disclosure of company information. Maya turned toward me. Evelyn. This is not a permanent appointment, I said. It is continuity. Richard laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound. Maya is a financial officer. She has never managed brand strategy, sales, or international development. Maya looked at him. I have managed cash flow, manufacturing budgets, supplier exposure, debt compliance, and operational forecasts for 18 years. That does not make you chief executive material. No, Judith said. Her judgment does. Richard ignored her. He looked toward Thomas. This is precisely the instability I warned you about. Evelyn blocks the appointed successor and immediately installs her ally. An interim executive without a transaction bonus, Thomas replied. Richard's face hardened. George leaned forward. We should not rush into another appointment. We already have a functioning executive team, I said. Maya can maintain operations while independent counsel reviews the documents. And who chooses independent counsel? Richard demanded. You? The directors without financial interest in the transaction. That conveniently excludes me. Your $12 million payment excludes you. He turned toward George. You know me. You know I would never damage this company. George's face tightened. I knew you had explored a sale. You encouraged me to consider strategic options. I did not encourage you to sign an exclusivity agreement. It is not binding in the manner Evelyn claims. There is a $6 million penalty. Under limited circumstances. Did you tell me about it? Richard's silence answered again. George looked down. That was the moment his loyalty began to separate from belief. He had voted for Vanessa because he trusted Richard's intentions. Now he was forced to confront the possibility that his friendship had been used to secure a corporate vote. The secretary asked whether the motion had been seconded. Judith raised one hand. I second. Richard objected. Maya cannot vote on her own appointment. She may abstain. Samuel said. The remaining 5 directors can decide. Maya nodded. I will abstain. That changed the numbers. Without Maya, 5 votes remained. Richard and George could oppose. I and Judith would support. Thomas would decide. Richard saw it too. He turned his full attention toward Thomas. Your fund invested in this company because of my leadership. Our fund invested because Vale and Mercer produces reliable cash flow and owns valuable assets. Assets Halcyon will pay a premium to acquire. A premium the board may still consider after independent review. An investigation will destroy confidence. Halcyon may withdraw. Then perhaps the transaction is not as valuable as you claimed. You are allowing personal drama to interfere with shareholder return. Thomas's expression cooled. I was not the director sleeping with the nominee. Vanessa lowered her eyes. Richard's face became red. I did not enjoy seeing him humiliated. That surprised me. After everything he had done, I had imagined satisfaction. What I felt instead was recognition. The man standing at the head of the table was not a stranger. He was Richard with every layer of protection removed. The charm depended on applause. The certainty depended on secrecy. The authority depended on other people correcting his mistakes before anyone noticed them. Without those supports, he was merely angry. Thomas turned toward Maya. If appointed, will you preserve all transaction documents? Yes. Will you suspend payments to Vantage? Yes. Will you suspend further transfers of confidential information? Yes. Will you preserve Halcyon as a potential strategic option pending review, rather than reject it immediately? Maya looked at me. I gave no signal. The answer had to be hers. Yes, she said. If an independent review concludes the transaction is in the company's interest and was renegotiated through proper authority, I would present it to the board. Thomas nodded. Will you retain management at both plants during the review? Yes. How long do you expect the review to take?
30
For preliminary findings, 60 for a full report. Thomas looked toward the secretary. I am ready. The roll call began. Mrs. Mercer? Yes. Ms. Palmer? Mr. Vale? Mr. Ellison? George stared at Richard. Richard gave him the smallest nod. It was not a request, it was an expectation created by 30 years of friendship. George looked at the bonus schedule once more, then at the signed memorandum. No, he said. The vote stood 2-2. The secretary turned toward Thomas. Mr. Avery? Thomas closed the Halcyon folder. Yes. The motion passed 3-2. With Maya abstaining, Maya Chen became interim chief executive officer of Vale and Mercer. Vanessa's face remained frozen. Richard looked as though the table had moved beneath him. Maya did not smile. She turned to the secretary. My first directive as interim CEO is to suspend payment to Vantage Strategic Partners and place all transaction-related electronic records under preservation hold. Charles objected. You cannot issue executive directives before the minutes are approved. The appointment is effective immediately. Judith said. Maya continued. Second, all external data room access is suspended pending review. Vanessa spoke for the first time since the vote. That could violate the Halcyon memorandum. Then we will obtain independent advice, Maya replied. You may trigger the termination payment. The company will not continue unauthorized disclosure, merely to protect an unauthorized agreement. Richard pushed his chair away. I will not permit this. You are chairman, not chief executive, Maya said. Operational authority is now mine. The words hit him harder than my deciding vote. He had expected to lose Vanessa's appointment only temporarily. He had not expected the machinery of the company to move beyond his control before he left the room. I introduced the next motion. That the board appoint independent counsel and a forensic accounting firm to investigate the Halcyon process, the Vantage payments, related party relationships, data transfers, and executive compensation arrangements. Judith seconded. This time, Thomas voted yes without hesitations. George abstained. The motion passed. Richard laughed bitterly. You have your investigation. Is that enough for you? No. I placed the communication strategy document in front of the board. You approved a plan to conceal material information, discredit a director, and blame her for a financial penalty created by your unauthorized signature. I approved scenario planning. You signed the memorandum. I acted to preserve opportunity. You negotiated a personal payment. It was offered to retain leadership. You concealed it from the board. Richard looked at me. Beneath the anger, I saw something else, disbelief. He had not imagined I would move against him beyond blocking Vanessa. He still believed marriage granted him a final layer of protection. He had counted on the woman I had been. The woman who corrected his numbers before presentations, who explained his absences to Ben, who softened his words to employees, who took responsibility for problems because preserving the partnership felt more important than receiving credit. That woman had not disappeared. She had simply learned the difference between love and surrender. I introduced the final motion, that Richard Vale be suspended from the office of chairman and from all transaction authority pending completion of the independent investigation. George looked up sharply. Evelyn, this is too far, is it? He founded this company. So did I. Suspension will become public. So will the transaction if Halcyon files notice. You could destroy his reputation. I looked at George. I did not sign his name. Richard's voice lowered. You want revenge? No. Revenge would be personal. I touched the memorandum. This is evidence. He looked around the table. Does anyone here truly believe the company is better without me? Maya answered first. This company is not better without your contribution. It is safer without your unchecked authority. Thomas nodded. Pending investigation. Yes. George looked at Richard. Memories passed across his face. Our first showroom, the years of expansion, the dinners, the funerals, the loans. He had spent the morning defending the friend he remembered. But directors did not vote on memories. The secretary began the roll call. I voted yes. Maya voted yes. Judith voted yes. Thomas voted yes. Richard voted no. Everyone turned toward George. His voice was barely audible. Yes. 5-1. Richard was suspended. The secretary recorded the result. Richard did not move for several seconds. Then Vanessa turned toward him. Her voice was low, but the room was silent enough for everyone to hear. You told me she had no power. Richard stared at the table. I answered for him. He never understood where the power came from. Vanessa looked at me with something close to hatred. But beneath it was fear. She had built her plan around Richard's authority. Now he had none. Maya stood M's. Cole, you are placed on paid administrative leave pending investigation. Your electronic access will be suspended immediately. Please surrender your company devices to information technology. Vanessa's hand closed around the emerald ring. You cannot prove I did anything illegal. That is what the investigation will determine. I acted under Richard's authority. Richard looked at her. There was no affection left in his expression, only the realization that her defense would be to place responsibility on him. Charles whispered something to Richard. Richard ignored him. He looked at me. 30 years, he said. And you do this to me in a single morning. No, Richard. I gathered the documents before me. You did this over many months. This morning was simply when the votes were counted. The investigation began before noon. By 12:15, external counsel had issued preservation notices. By 1, Daniel Ruiz had suspended access to the Halcyon data room and secured copies of all upload logs. By 2:30, the $400,000 Vantage payment had been stopped. At 3, Vanessa surrendered her company laptop. Her second phone was not listed among the devices she gave information technology. That omission became the investigators' first question. Richard left headquarters through the private garage. Vanessa left through the lobby. The employees who had watched her face on the screens that morning saw security accompany her to the doors. By then, Maya's team had replaced the promotional images with a plain statement. The board of directors has appointed Maya Chen as interim chief executive officer. Valen Mercer remains fully operational. Additional information will be provided following an independent governance review. No accusations, no details, no public revenge. Only facts. Richard called me 6 times that afternoon. I did not answer. He sent 3 messages. You have no idea what this will do to the company. We need to present a united front. Do not speak to the press until we talk. The final message was almost absurd. Even suspended, he was still issuing instructions. I returned home after 7. His car was in the driveway. I considered asking security to remove him. Then I remembered it was still legally his home too. The divorce had not yet been filed. Inside, Richard sat in the library with a glass of whiskey. The cream envelope had been removed from the table after the meeting and returned to my safe. Without it, the room looked ordinary again. That felt strange. A piece of paper had changed the company's direction, yet the shelves still held the same books. The clock still ticked. Rain still touched the windows. Richard looked at me. You did not answer. I was working. You suspended me from my own company. The board suspended you. You made the motion. Yes, he stood, his tie was gone. The top button of his shirt was open. For the first time in years, he looked his age. You have humiliated me. You announced your mistress as CEO in front of 600 people. So this is retaliation. No, you expect me to believe this is about governance? I expect nothing from you now. He walked toward me. Halcyon could have secured the future of the company. Then you should have presented the proposal honestly. You would have rejected it. Perhaps. Exactly. That is why boards vote. You are emotionally attached to factories that should have been closed years ago. I am attached to informed decisions. You would sacrifice shareholder value to protect employees who can be replaced by automation. And you would sacrifice those employees for $12 million. His face tightened. The bonus was not my idea. You accepted it. It was contingent compensation. You hid it, because I knew how you would react. You planned my reaction before I knew there was a transaction. Richard looked away. That was the closest he came to admitting it. I placed my handbag on the table. Why, Vanessa? He turned back. You said this was not personal. It is not relevant to the board. It is relevant to our marriage. Our marriage ended a long time ago. You keep saying that as though repeating it changes when I was informed. We became partners, not husband and wife. You never complained when the partnership protected you. I felt invisible in my own life. The words surprised me. Not because they were impossible, because they sounded like something he had rehearsed, perhaps with Vanessa. Then you chose a woman who looked at you as if you were still becoming someone, I said. She believed in me. I believed in you before there was anything to believe in. You always reminded me of what could go wrong. Because you needed someone to. I needed someone who did not make me feel old. There it was. Not strategy, not love, fear. Richard had not risked the company only for money. He had done it to escape the evidence of time. Vanessa represented a version of himself, without 30 years of compromise, mistakes, or responsibility. I represented the entire record. You were willing to close 2 factories so a younger woman would look at you as powerful, I said. That is not fair. No, it is merely accurate. He poured more whiskey. Vanessa misled me. I had been waiting for that sentence. How? The termination schedule, the 6-month option. I had never seen it. You saw the factory closures. Yes. You saw your bonus. Yes. You signed the memorandum. Yes. You knew her brother controlled Vantage. I knew he was involved. Then what part of your betrayal becomes acceptable because she planned to betray you later? Richard looked toward the dark windows. I believed I would remain chairman. I believed I could protect the company during integration. You believed you would retain your title. I could have influenced Halcyon. Vanessa's email says they plan to remove you. I know what it says. And now you want me to see you as another victim. I am telling you the transaction was not what I was promised. She may have lied to you, I said. But every lie she told required you to betray someone who trusted you. He closed his eyes. For a moment I saw the man who had once stood beside me in the warehouse after the fire, smoke in his hair, blood on his hand from broken glass, terrified, but unwilling to leave before every employee was accounted for. That man had existed. The tragedy was not that Richard had always been cruel, it was that he had once been better. What happens now? He asked. The investigation continues. To the company. Maya manages operations, the board reviews all strategic options. To me, that depends on what the investigators find. Evelyn. His voice softened in the way it used to when he wanted forgiveness before admitting the full offense. I made mistakes. You made decisions. I was afraid of becoming irrelevant. So you made me irrelevant first. He looked at me. I never meant to erase you. You thanked me for supporting the company I co-founded. The speech was badly worded. The speech was approved by Vantage as part of a plan to discredit me. I did not read every draft. You never do. The sentence landed between us. For 30 years, Richard's greatest defense had been that he had not read, understood, or intended the details I later repaired. It had worked because I repaired them. Not anymore. The doorbell rang. Neither of us moved. It rang again. I went to the entrance. Vanessa stood outside. Her cream suit was wrinkled now. Her hair was pulled back. She held no umbrella despite the rain. I considered leaving her there, then Richard appeared behind me. What are you doing here? He asked. We need to talk. You should speak through counsel. If I speak through counsel, you will both regret it. Richard opened the door wider. Vanessa entered. Her eyes moved from him to me. You should know that Halcyon has terminated my access, she said. That is not surprising, I replied. They are denying knowledge of the undisclosed terms. Also not surprising. They are going to claim Nathan and I acted independently. Did you? No. The answer came too quickly to be trusted. Richard stepped forward. What did you promise them? Vanessa looked at him. I promised the board vote. You promised my vote. I promised you could deliver it. You hid the termination option. It was not final. You told Nathan not to include it in my version, because you would have panicked. You planned to remove me. I planned to preserve the transaction. By eliminating me? By giving Halcyon flexibility. Richard stared at her. The language he had used against me was now being used against him. Necessary change, strategic flexibility, modern leadership. It sounded different when he was the obsolete asset. Vanessa turned to me. I can give you the full Halcyon file. Why? Because their attorneys are constructing a story in which Richard exceeded authority, and I manipulated him for personal benefit. That story contains substantial truth. Not all of it. What are they hiding? The property plan. I waited. She continued. Halcyon did not primarily want Vale and Mercer's retail operations. They wanted the real estate beneath Plant 1, Plant 3 and the distribution center. Richard frowned. The integration model valued the manufacturing capacity. The public model did. The internal plan separated the assets. She removed a small phone from her handbag, the second device. The land near Plant 1 has been targeted for a logistics development. Halcyon has an agreement with a private infrastructure fund. I took the phone but did not unlock it. What proof? Emails, draft purchase schedules, internal valuation reports. Why were you involved? My brother was coordinating Vantage's transaction work. And your compensation? Part of it came from Halcyon. Part from the infrastructure fund after the properties were sold. Richard looked at her with open disbelief. You were being paid twice? Vanessa's expression hardened. You were receiving $12 million. To remain chairman. They were never keeping you. You knew that. Yes. The word broke whatever remained between them. Richard turned away. Vanessa looked at me. If I cooperate, will you recommend the company not pursue claims against me? No. Her face changed. You need this evidence. We do. And you expect me to give it without protection? I expect you to decide whether cooperation produces a better outcome than obstruction. Independent counsel will negotiate the terms. You are enjoying this. No. She searched my face as though trying to find the jealous wife Richard had described. The woman whose emotions could be predicted and used. You hate me, she said. I do not know you well enough to hate you. You think you are better than me. I think I am responsible for my choices. You are responsible for yours. She looked toward Richard. He told me the company was his, and you believed him. He said you had withdrawn, and you entered my office before the board voted. He said you would sign the proxy. And you built your future on the assumption that another woman would surrender hers. Vanessa's eyes lowered. For the first time, she appeared younger than 36, not innocent, simply less invincible. I will send the files to independent counsel, she said. Do not delete anything. I won't. You will surrender that phone. After we have a written cooperation agreement, that decision belongs to counsel. She picked up her handbag. At the door, Richard spoke. Was any of it real? Vanessa stopped. He did not need to explain the question. She looked back at him. Real enough for you to sign. Then she left. Richard stood in the entrance hall long after the door closed. I did not comfort him. He had asked a question. I had once asked silently while watching his hand touch Vanessa's back beneath the stage lights. Was any of it real? I had learned the answer did not change the consequences. Richard turned toward me. Do not file for divorce yet. I have already contacted an attorney. His face fell. We can survive this, the company might. I mean us. There is no us left to protect. We built everything together. Yes, that has to matter. It does. I looked around the house. At the chandelier, at the photographs, at the evidence of a life that had once been shared. It matters enough that I will not pretend the ending was the whole story. Hope appeared briefly in his eyes. Then I finished. But it does not require me to stay for another chapter. 6 months later, I stood inside Plant 1, beneath a photograph taken in 1998. In the photograph, Richard and I were 30 years younger. He wore a denim shirt with paint on one sleeve. I wore work boots and held a roll of blueprints beneath my arm. Behind us stood 23 employees. 7 of them still worked for Vail and Mercer. The photograph had hung in a storage corridor for years. Maya moved it to the entrance after the investigation ended. Beneath it was a new bronze plaque. Plant 1 opened by co-founders Evelyn Mercer and Richard Vail. Built with the courage of its first employees, Richard's name remained. Some board members had suggested removing it. I refused. History should not be rewritten merely because one of its participants later disappointed us. That was what Richard had tried to do to me. I would not repeat it. The independent investigation lasted 73 days. Its findings filled more than 400 pages. Richard had exceeded his authority by signing the Halcyon Memorandum. He had failed to disclose his relationship with Vanessa, his personal transaction payment, Vanessa's related party connection to Vantage, the proposed factory closures, the $6 million termination provision. Vanessa had authorized the transfer of confidential information and participated in arrangements designed to benefit her and her brother. Vantage had charged Vail and Mercer more than $2 million for work performed primarily to advance a transaction never approved by the board. Halcyon denied directing the concealment. The evidence suggested otherwise. But their legal team moved quickly. The exclusivity agreement was cancelled without termination payment after independent counsel argued that Richard lacked authority and material conflicts had invalidated the process. Halcyon agreed to return or destroy all company data. They also paid a confidential settlement. The amount was not announced publicly. It was enough to cover the investigation, modernize part of Plant 1, and establish a transition fund for employees whose positions might eventually change through automation. Vanessa cooperated after negotiating limited protection from certain civil claims. She resigned from the company. Vantage returned a portion of its fees. Nathan Cole faced professional investigations in 2 states. Vanessa did not become CEO of Halcyon. They had never intended to keep her either. Richard resigned from the board 1 week before the final report was released. The resignation letter described his conduct as errors in judgment made during a period of personal and strategic transition. It was the closest he came to accepting public responsibility. Privately, his settlement with the company required him to waive the $12 million transaction payment, reimburse part of the investigation costs, surrender certain unvested benefits, sign a 3-year non-interference agreement. He retained his ordinary shares. I did not try to take them from him. The company he had helped build remained part of his financial future. It was no longer his private kingdom. Our divorce was finalized in the 5th month. The process was quieter than the board meeting. No accusations appeared in court filings. No reporters waited outside. We divided property, investments, and personal possessions through mediation. Richard kept the lake house. I kept the city home and my founder's share. He asked for the chandelier. I let him have it. It had once represented proof that we had succeeded. I no longer needed an object to prove anything. Ben remained at Vale and Mercer, though not as general counsel. Maya and the board allowed him to continue as senior legal counsel under direct supervision after the investigation concluded that he had not designed the transaction or received personal compensation. His silence had still mattered. So did his eventual cooperation. He accepted the decision without protest. For the first 3 months, he was assigned to manufacturing compliance at Plant 1. Some people thought I had arranged it as punishment. I had not. Maya did. She believed anyone preparing legal documents about factory closures should understand what a factory was. Ben began arriving before 7. He spent time with safety teams, line supervisors and employees whose names had once appeared only as labor cost assumptions. One afternoon, Teresa called me. "Your son listens more than he used to," she said. "That is a beginning." Ben and I had dinner every other Sunday. We did not discuss Richard unless necessary. We did not pretend trust had been restored merely because he had chosen correctly at the end. Trust returned through smaller things, calling when he said he would, and swearing uncomfortable questions, admitting uncertainty without looking for a reward. At our 6th dinner, Ben placed an envelope beside my plate. Inside was a handwritten letter. He had not asked a lawyer to review it. He had not used the word misunderstanding. He wrote, "I knew enough to speak, and I stayed silent because I wanted Dad's approval. I told myself I was protecting the family, but I was protecting my own ambition. You should not have had to discover both betrayals on the same night." I did not forgive him immediately. I did keep the letter. Maya served as interim CEO for 90 days. Then the board conducted an external search. 53 candidates applied. Maya refused to participate unless the board considered other qualified people fairly. After 3 rounds of interviews and an independent assessment, the board offered her the permanent position. She accepted on one condition. "No more founder offices beside the boardroom," she told me. "The company needs governance, not a royal family." I agreed. My former office became a meeting room for employee councils. Vanessa's old brand department was reorganized. Richard's private executive suite became 2 smaller offices and a shared strategy room. Maya kept her original desk. She said it worked perfectly well. At the first annual meeting under her leadership, she announced a new employee ownership program. I contributed a portion of my ordinary shares to create it, not the class of founder share. Samuel advised me to retain that until the governance structure could be permanently revised. But the new trust gave long-serving employees a collective economic interest and formal consultation rights concerning major plant closures. It did not guarantee that no facility would ever close. Responsible leadership could not make such promises. Markets changed. Technology changed. Companies sometimes had to make painful decisions. What mattered was that those decisions would no longer be hidden inside bonus schedules and described as inevitable after one man had already signed them. Plant 1 was not closed. It It was modernized, some manual roles changed, but retraining began before new equipment arrived. The distribution center remained open. Plant 3 reduced one shift through voluntary retirement rather than mass termination. Vale and Mercer did not become the largest furniture company in the country. It remained independent, profitable, imperfect, alive. The event at Plant 1 was held to celebrate completion of the first modernization phase. Nearly 400 employees and family members filled the factory courtyard. Children sat on folding chairs. Food trucks lined the outer fence. Music played from a temporary stage beneath the old company sign. Maya spoke first. She thanked the manufacturing teams, the engineers and the employees who had participated in the redesign. Then she called me to the stage. I had told her I did not want a ceremony. She ignored me. The applause began before I reached the microphone. For 1 second I was back in the anniversary ballroom. 600 people. Emerald silk. Richard raising a glass, the room turning toward me to see whether I would break. But this applause did not feel hollow. The people before me were not celebrating my retirement or my revenge. They were celebrating the fact that the doors behind us remained open. I looked toward the front row. Maya sat beside Judith. Thomas had flown in for the event. George stood near the aisle. He had resigned from the board after the investigation, saying he needed to examine why personal loyalty had impaired his judgment. We were not close anymore. But when our eyes met, he nodded. Ben stood beside Teresa and several factory supervisors. He smiled. I unfolded my speech, then I set it aside. 30 years ago, I began. Richard and I believed building a company meant creating products people wanted to buy. The courtyard became quiet. We were wrong. A few people smiled. Products matter. Revenue matters. Strategy, technology, and growth all matter. But a company is not only what it sells, it is the promises made to the people who help build it. I looked toward the photograph hanging inside the entrance. We did not always keep those promises. Some of us forgot that leadership is not ownership of every decision. It is responsibility for the consequences. Maya watched me. We will still make mistakes. We will still face difficult choices. But no employee should learn that their future was traded in a room where the people receiving bonuses already knew the result. Applause began somewhere near the back. I waited until it faded. The future of Vale and Mercer does not belong to one founder, one chairman, or one chief executive. It belongs to everyone willing to protect the work without pretending that protecting it means refusing to change. Afterward, I walked alone through the factory. The new equipment was quiet for the weekend event. Fresh safety lines had been painted on the floor. Digital monitors replaced the old paper production boards. Near the rear loading area, I found the section of brick wall where Richard and I had once written our first annual revenue target in pencil. The number was still faintly visible beneath a protective panel. We had missed it by almost 40%. At the time, I thought failure meant not reaching the number. Years later, I understood there were worse failures. Success could make people believe they no longer owed anything to those who helped create it. Power could persuade a man that the person protecting his weaknesses had none of her own. And love could become a facade when one person expected the other to disappear behind it. My phone vibrated. A message from Richard. He had sent one every few weeks since the divorce. Most were practical. A tax document. A question about an old photograph. News about someone we both knew. This one contained a picture of the lake at sunset. Beneath it, he had written, "I finally understand what I lost." I looked at the message for a long time. Then I placed the phone back in my bag without answering. Perhaps he did understand. Perhaps he only understood that the consequences had remained after the excitement disappeared. Either way, his understanding no longer determined my peace. I returned to the courtyard. A group of employees stood beneath the entrance photograph. One of their children pointed at the younger version of me. "Is that Mrs. Mercer?" she asked. Her mother nodded. "She started the company." The girl looked from the photograph to me. "She looks different," I smiled. I was different. She studied the old image again. "Were you the boss?" Before I could answer, Teresa laughed. She was the one who knew where everything was. That description pleased me more than boss ever had. Richard had spent 30 years believing he was the face of Vale and Mercer. He had believed the speeches. The photographs and the title made him the company. But a face is only a facade. It can smile while foundations crack beneath it. I had built the systems no one applauded, the controls no one remembered, the relationships no press release could measure. And when the final vote was called, The power did not come from the chair Richard occupied, or the stage Vanessa had stepped onto. It came from the foundation they had both mistaken for silence. The foundation was still there. And it was mine.